Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission for September 17th to order, please. Please note for the record that Commissioners Zellmer, Solomon, and Warner are not present, and that a quorum is present. All right, the next thing is a approval of the minutes from the August 20th meeting. Are there any revisions, any corrections? Can I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve the meeting minutes from
August 20th?
August 20th.
Second? Any? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you. Did that last time too, didn't I? Next, we have Planner Lambert is going to give us a 5-minute field guide and enlighten us on determining significance in historic buildings.
Thank you, Chairman Hiller. Tonight's 5-minute field guide is basically focused on SOI standard number 4, acquired or gained significance. Frequently, I have received inquiries about specific properties where interested individuals often have asked me to identify the original or most historic portion of specific properties. Unfortunately, while we can often identify the periods of construction for a property, even identifying the oldest sections, it is typically impossible or impractical to separate the evolution of a property into categorized historic segments, those segments being ranked only by age or original condition. When evaluating the historic character of a specific property, preservationists often use the terminology acquired or gained significance when discussing the evolution of character-defining elements of a designated property. So where do we find guidance as a local historic preservation commission to determine what acquired significance means? An explanation of Standard 4 of the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation has been prepared by the Technical Preservation Services Division of the National Park Service. The definition states that most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. Materials, features, and spaces do not need to be original to be considered historic and character defining. So looking at a dictionary definition of original, we see in the Merriam-Webster example, we see two definitions that pertain to preservation. The first one being of, relating to, or constituting an origin or beginning, in other words, the initial point of construction and preservation. Or in a second definition, it's a work that is composed, the first-hand work. Historic, again, is an adjective that describes buildings, and according to Merriam-Webster, in relation to buildings, the definition would be dating from or preserved from a past time or culture. A property can be significant not only for the way it was originally constructed or crafted, but also for the way it was adapted at a later period, or for the way it illustrates changing tastes, attitudes, and uses over a period of time. Buildings change over time, and these changes often contribute to a property's historic significance. If a change is important in defining the property's historic character, those changes should be retained and preserved. Changes should be carefully evaluated for their relative importance to a property's overall historic character in relationship to its period of significance. However, a change is not automatically considered to have acquired significance just because it occurred within the property's period of significance or by virtue of the change's age. For example, just because a change is more than 50 years old does not necessarily mean it's historic or significant. Also, a change important to the historic character of one building may not be similarly important to the character of another building in the same district. And some changes may have little or no historic or architectural merit, or may otherwise not be sufficiently important that they have to be retained in order to preserve the overall character of a historic property. Some examples of acquired significance include an addition to a public school to accommodate growing enrollment may be important when the property is significant for its associations with the history of the educational history of a community. A front porch added to a single-family residence, important for its architecture, may be significant depending upon when it was added, its architectural character, and its condition. An exterior or interior remodeling of a commercial building may be important to the historic character of a building associated with a particular person or with the later commercial development of a neighborhood or area. Some changes may also be important for reasons apart from why the property is otherwise significant. For example, a later structural glass storefront on a 19th century commercial block may be important as an example of an architectural style or trend, just as a tenant space may be significant for its associations with an important later historic event, use, or person. Conversely, a later change to a building may not be significant if the property is important as an example of a specific architectural style or the work of a particular architect. An individual storefront change to a multi-storefront commercial building, or changes made for a particular use or tenant may not be as important depending upon the extent to which they contribute to the property's historic character. So for instance, a short-term tenant who made major changes to a building may not have significance in the overall history of the evolution of that building. A minor addition on the rear or side of a property may not be sufficiently important that it must be retained, and interior changes of a limited impact to the historic character of a property's important interior spaces, features, and materials may not be significant. A change needs to be evaluated within the context of the specific historic property, the property's materials, spaces, and features, and why it is significant to determine the change's relative importance to the property's overall historic character, and whether the proposed change should be retained and preserved. For contributing or significant buildings in historic districts, a change needs to be evaluated within the context of the historic building itself, as well as how it fits in with the district it's located in. Evaluations should be made on the basis of the property's National Register of Historic Places nomination or a local nomination, as well as other available documentation, research, and information as needed and particular to that property. Wanting to return a property to its original appearance is not adequate justification on its own to remove later additions and may not meet the standards for rehabilitation if it requires the removal of later significant materials, features, or spaces that have acquired significance in their own right. Other times, these later changes may not be as important and can be removed without impacting the historic character of the property. The relative importance of a change to the historic character of a property remains specific to that individual property, as well as to how an individual property contributes to the district or neighborhood in which it's located. That's a lot of information, but again, it highlights the kind of evaluation that this commission applies to each case that comes before it. And again, for those of you who are interested in having a copy of this, I can forward the technical bulletin on the standards, or any of you can go to the National Park Service website and look up their technical services information on each of the standards for rehabilitation. Do you have any other questions or comments about tonight's presentation?
I would like you to forward that information to me, please.
Very good.
Thank you.
Number 5, next on the agenda is review of building permit applications. Tonight we have only one review. It is 327 South 4th Street, the Larrabee House, application to consider replacement of historic wood siding with new siding at a significant property.
Thank you, Chairman Hiller. As you are aware, we've had this project in front of us a few times. This property is located in the Central Geneva Historic District, which is located in on the National Register of Historic Places. It's also located in the southern half of our local Geneva Historic District. I'm not going to review the entire history, but just so you are aware and so the applicant is aware, I do have the previous slides available for reference. Again, the history. As we know, this is the William M. Larrabee home, built in 1854. William Larrabee was the treasurer of the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad and was very influential in bringing the railroad on westward to Geneva. The house has similarities to other homes in the Geneva Historic District. In close architectural character is to the Parker Turner House, which was remodeled in 1867 by the contractors Clark and Long, who had a long history here in Geneva. We do have historic views of the building. We know that the building was remodeled early in the 20th century, at least once, but possibly twice. The remodeling that was completed by 1925, and so is nearing 100 years old, and is evidenced in historic pictures that we have of the property, showing the changes over time. Again, some images that have been provided by the applicant and also acquired from the Geneva History Museum. As you're aware, the project consists of a rehabilitation of the Larrabee House. The Larrabee House was moved several years ago, about 14 feet to the southwest on the property, and put on a new foundation. The proposal is to connect the building with a new narthex to the Fellowship and Worship Center of St. Mark's Episcopal Church. So the proposal, as presented originally in April of 2018, and again, an addition was permitted to the rear, and that addition is to be sided with board and batten siding in accordance with the Commission's direction at that time. This was part of a planned unit development to refresh everyone's memory. The timeline is it came before the Commission as a concept review in April of 2018. Then it was brought forward as a planned unit development in June of 2018 with a final planned unit development review in September of 2018. At that time, the discussion was the original siding was to be restored if it was found to exist beneath the aluminum siding. Then in May of 2019, a request was made by the congregation to consider an amendment to the PUD allowing for window replacement. That came forward again in July of 2019, and the Commission made conditional approvals for the replacement of certain windows and the retention and restoration of others. The siding replacement amendment then followed. It was brought to the May 28th meeting where the window replacement was considered, but then was withdrawn by the applicant and was not to be considered at that time. And then it came forward again as a separate request in August of 2019, last month, and then was brought forward tonight for your consideration. At the August meeting, the Commission was seeking additional clarification on items from the applicant so that you could compare apples to apples and understand what the entire project was about. These were the items that were not received from the applicant. The bold item at the top is following that meeting in August. I committed to gathering all of the comments that I received from commissioners, and some of your questions overlap, some were worded different ways, so I created a table that I thought responded to all the questions the commissioners were asking. That was submitted to the applicant to fill out, but that has not been submitted in the form that I assembled for your comparison. With that, I would turn it over to the commissioners if you have specific questions for me. Otherwise, there is an applicant presentation if you wish to hear that or how you would like to proceed. I would need to load that onto the computer if, when you're ready to proceed with that.
Before the applicant comes to the podium, I'd like to make a brief statement. I'd like to caution the commission and the petitioners. We've had many long discussions concerning this petition, several regarding the siding replacement, and they've all been continued because of a lack of information or new information being presented at a meeting. And I fear this may happen again tonight. We can only review and act what is presented in our packet. So be aware of if new information is presented at a meeting, it will trigger a continuation to review the new information. That's a continuation. Now, the petitioners have completed a cost analysis that we requested. However, there are several large dollar items that have no documentation, such as bids or even companies' names. So it's difficult to determine how some of these dollar amounts were arrived. Basic information we'd ask from any homeowner. One of the many jobs of our city preservation planner is to help people navigate paperwork so that we have a packet that we can vote on. And I'm not sure we can vote on this proposal as it's presented. So what is the commission's pleasure? Do you wish to discuss the petition as it's presented? Do you wish to limit the discussion to what's missing in the petition? Or do you wish to continue for more information? Any comments, any suggestions, any?
Mr. Lambert, could we see the slide, please, of the questions that we as a commission requested information from the applicant? The one that you just showed us a little bit ago. No.
You had it up?
That one there. Okay. Okay, taking a look at this, is there anything that's in our packet that answers any of these questions?
Who are you asking that of? Are you asking the chair, are you asking me, or?
No, I'm asking
The commission?
we as the
Okay.
commission. I'm asking the commission.
I just wanted to make sure.
Do any of us feel that any of these have been sufficiently answered in the information in our packet?
Well, I believe the scope of work of the building elevations, we have some diagrams. Now, the material I'm looking at in the packet does show elevations, color-coded. That's part of the submission, is that correct? So I would believe that the scope of the work by building elevation is defined with the materials that were in the packet. I do see some cost for alternatives to total replacement there as well, but, I don't know if it would, I should be the one that I would ask the applicant to acknowledge or define which of these areas or direct us to where they may be covered in their presentation.
Well, given that we can only act on our packet, the information
Right.
that was given to us,
Right.
any information that was given tonight is going to be new information.
No, well, my suggestion was for the applicant to identify where in the submission that was previously made, that we have in front of us, these items are presented. I think there's a bunch of it in there.
Okay. Are you comfortable with the documentation? That there's been enough documentation in terms of bids, company names, or?
Company names, of course, definitely not. Specific bids, no, but in terms of cost, alternatives, scope of work, I do see a significant amount of that being addressed.
Okay, so what's the general consensus? Do you wish to discuss the petition? You want to limit the discussion to missing pieces of the petition? Or do you want to continue for more information? What's the feeling?
I would go ahead and have a discussion.
On what?
Well, the material that is in the packet, I think some of it does cover the elements that are up there. I certainly have some questions about some of the elements.
As I,
Do you feel there's enough in that packet now to take a vote?
I do not.
So basically, we will limit the discussion to what's missing in the packet. Is that fair?
The discussion as to what's missing in the package.
Acknowledging that we are not probably going to take a vote.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding that.
There are things in the packet that are, maybe not clear or just, for example, remediation, let's just take that. These are the things you want to discuss that probably should have been in there or should be in there? Or do you want to just talk in general of the whole petition? I'm saying, I guess, do we want to help the petitioners get to a point where they have a petition that we can actually vote on?
Well, if the information's not in the
No.
packet, then we can't vote on it. I mean, they can tell us about it today,
But
but
we can tell them
can't.
we can tell them what we want to have in there.
But we did tell them already what we wanted.
Okay.
It's right here, and it's not in this packet. They didn't do it. They didn't do everything. So how can we vote on information that we haven't had to take a look at? They didn't meet the deadline to getting the information to Mr. Lambert. So Mr. Lambert couldn't get the information to us, so how can we vote on something? And this is not the first time that this has happened with this applicant. We have not gotten information as we have respectfully requested in a time that we have respectfully requested it from. So I myself, and I'm just one of four today, I myself would feel, I think I would not be able to vote. The three of you might, but I would have to abstain from voting because I can't make a decision based on what's in here because not everything that we've asked for is here. That's my thought.
Do you want to continue for more information? That would require a motion.
I think I'd like to hear what,
What the petitioner has to say.
no, I think I'd like to hear what Mr. Hamilton has to say.
Well, I guess if we have discussion and there are some of the questions that are answered during that discussion, are we saying that we can't consider that since it wasn't in the material we received?
It should not be considered as part of what we vote on tonight. We should not be considering new material.
Listen, I think what the question is if there's clarifications, I think that's the case. But I think if you're getting, I think the frustration at the last meeting was there were, and I don't know what the presentation fully is, but last meeting, you got a lot of bid information that was submitted in handwriting and whatever to you during the meeting. You couldn't absorb that. So if that's the kind of information you're concerned about getting, and you get that tonight in the if you go ahead and let them present, and you get that kind of information, I can understand where you might want to continue it. But if you're looking for clarification on specific items that are in the application as was submitted, I think that's a fair hearing to hear that information. But certainly if you're getting new information or there's questions about numbers that can't be answered or haven't been clarified, I can understand where you're coming from. But what I'm hearing from Commissioner Hamilton is, and I think also from Commissioner Stasen, is that there are questions you have about what was submitted, and you would like at least that clarified. You may not get all the answers, and then that may answer your question as to how you proceed from there.
Okay.
Is that a fair
Okay.
analysis of what I'm
Yes.
hearing from the commission?
From my perspective, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we will continue with the discussion on the petition and allow you to ask your questions. So we'll have the petitioner present their project.
He's got it, oh, you got it? Yeah, so just show him how to roll through.
Yeah. Who's presenting?
We both are.
Okay, so This will take you forward. This will take you back. If you ever need to go back or anything. Okay? Forward,
Forward
backward.
and backward.
Okay,
Okay.
got it. You can operate this also. Want to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Sweeney. This is Arnie Silvestri. We're both involved with the church project. Me as a volunteer, Arnie as the contractor and builder. We had gone through great extremes to present the packet that we have tonight as far as time, information, and what have you. What we have produced here we think is a little bit clearer, easier to understand than what the information that Michael gave me, although it was very thorough, it was almost impossible to go through that process and fill it out accurately, measuring literally each and every piece. On a project like this, you do not measure by the inches, you measure by the square foot and get a better idea from that of what the overall cost is going to be. We're presenting this for the Larrabee House Community Center, and this involves the exterior siding, the exterior trim, soffit, crown molding, and the restoration of the gable and corbels that we have on the building as of right now.
Forward is this way.
This basically describes the project. It involves the restoration and repurposing of existing structure located at 327 South 4th Street. Connection both above and below ground to St. Mark's Church. Michael's already spoken in depth about that as far as what we're actually doing there. Structure was built in 1854. Remodeling occurred in 1902, and as Michael had brought out further, other projects had been added and detracted from it. There are porches that were added and removed. We acquired the church in 1960, and here I'm just repeating what Michael had said. In 1964, the porch was the west-facing porch was removed, and in 1970 it was enclosed in aluminum siding and aluminum storm windows. 2000 physically moved to the southwest corner of the property. This is a map. There's two documents here that are actually the Sanborn maps that show the house as it was in 1897 and again in 1905, and you'll see that it has been in 1897 it was a little bit more extensive. In 1905 they removed quite a bit of what was there, and the reason that I bring that up is because at that time when these changes were made, they either patched or added additional siding that was not originally historic from the original building. Although it is in essence over 100 years old, the siding is just one of many varieties that we had found on the building after the aluminum siding was taken off. The issue with what we have here is the damage. The biggest problem was there was poorly installed roof system, improper flashing went along with that, and that has allowed the rainwater to seep into and behind the crown molding, the soffit, and the frieze boards. Significant linear feet of soffit trim and crown molding suffered water damage beyond repair. The west porch has been repaired multiple times. Evidence that west wall was resided also along with that. Evidently, when they tore the porch off and then repatched it with the newer siding, that's not the same. And then when they added the porch again, same thing happened. They had to replace the siding that was originally there. The second porch door was removed and the wall, including siding, was patched. The north face east of the bump out had evidence at one time had a door and a porch on it. Then, to top it off, when the house was moved, all the bottom trim boards were removed. That in turn, even though that's not on our list, caused issues with flashing. The trim boards did not extend past the edge of the foundation. water had seeped in and was causing dry rot and also insect infestation, which we found. With removal of the interior plaster and exterior aluminum siding, we just also discovered a window was removed and wall and siding patched on the southeast face. We've identified at least 4 different siding materials, different nails, and reveals from multiple periods of replacement and patching. The recent completion of new shingles also uncovered evidence that water had damaged and extended into the roof and rafter system, meaning the ends of the rafters had rotted out and are causing us to have to remove the existing trim that is already in terrible condition to reinforce the ends of those rafters. And then the next page, we have the issue of the paint. There's multiple coats of paint over many, multiple coats of paint over many years. We have had a rough guesstimate from a painting contractor. They thought there was at least 12 to 14 layers of paint on this house, the majority of those being lead paint based. We had a contractor come out, one of many paint contractors that came out, who was actually willing to come out and look at the project. He tried a chemical remover. He worked on a certain area for about an hour and a half, and that area consisted of approximately 2 square feet. And with all of that time and multiple layers of chemical applied, he was not able to get anything even close to bare wood. So that failed, and regarding that, we would in turn have to mechanically remove it, which would involve sanding. There's a heat removal process, and due to the size of the structure, that's just not practical. That process is basically like a heating iron that you apply to the siding, leave it on for 20 seconds, and the idea with that is the heat will raise the paint off the wood, and therefore you can just simply scrape it off. But to do that on a building of this size, and we have the square footage to follow here in the rest of this presentation, it's just not practical to do that. Mechanical removal, that is the probable choice, and what that involves is it requires scaffolding and tenting, as well as capture and worker protection. There are very few contractors in the Fox Valley or even in the western suburbs that are willing to perform that type of lead paint remediation. We also explored the possibility of encapsulation. That is a very challenging proposition and price prohibitive. And part of what this process is, it's a ceramic-based material. It also has another name. It's called Rhino Shield, but you still have to prep the surface in the same way, and we have also a cost on that. Then the biggest issue.
Is it appropriate to ask questions at this time, or should we wait for the presentation to conclude?
I would suggest you make your notes so that they can make their unified presentation and then
Okay,
come back to their questions.
okay.
And then as we go on, the real issue that we have as far as builders, and between Arnie and myself, we probably have at least 7 years in the construction business. The original framing was 2x4 with 1-inch solid board sheathing applied horizontally directly over the studs. And this sheathing was not milled, it was just planks of wood. That is the way they did it back then. And in certain areas, many areas, the gaps are so large between the planking, the sheathing, that you can literally stick your finger through. And the only material that was acting as the exterior protection was the siding that was on the building. I had a sample last time that I was here, and the boards that are actually on the building, they have a 1/2-inch butt at the bottom of the clapboard, and as it works its way up, there's areas that are approximately only 1/8 of an inch thick, so that's not really very much protection for the building to have. In a modern building practice, we would use 4x8 OSB sheathing or plywood sheathing. and install a vapor barrier over the top of that. And that vapor barrier typically is Tyvek house wrap, which prevents infiltration of air and water, but it does allow water vapor to escape, preventing interior mold and rot. Here's this is the west elevation, and all of the elevations will represent with these two colors. The green areas are representing places where the water damage was so great that and the decay was caused by the improper flashing, particularly in the roof and soffit areas. The areas in orange are original or not original, had no siding that was exposed after aluminum siding was removed, meaning some of the previous additions taken off as far as windows being changed previously before the siding was put on. When those new other windows were put in, they tore off quite a bit of siding, and therefore there was nothing on the wall except plywood. So that's kind of what those two colors actually represent. So I'm going to let Arnie take over as far as, we both did the inspections, but he's been on the project much longer than I have as far as regarding the site. Down here.
Okay, so like Mike was saying, when you look at the front of the building, these areas here, this is siding that has definitely been replaced at some point. This porch was ripped off in the 60s. The Mrs. King, who lives across the street, kitty corner, had kind of gave me the scoop on it, that one of the church pastors that lived in the home, his wife didn't like the porch and they decided to take it off. So this siding, because when you take off this porch part, there's no siding underneath here. They ended up re-siding this whole thing all the way up and down. And when you look at it, you can tell you'll see on the pictures here that it's a lot cleaner. There's actually round nails. You can tell they're a galvanized round shank nail, which is different than what is on some of the older sections of the building. And it's also quite a bit cleaner, siding in these areas. Here is one spot where there was a door that used to be here that we are putting back in. And again, you can see right here, the little nail heads right here. There's a row of them that go up and down. And they're, again, a newer nail. You can also see that there's a black tar paper under here, which, represents something that was done much later than just recently, or back in the 1800s. This is one of the soffits on that same elevation on the west. This is kind of the southwest elevation right here. You see the damage in the soffit. That's one that's has to be completely replaced. This is up at the top, the very top gable on the west side, the first 3 or 4 feet of it. And again, that all corresponds back to these pictures here. How much of the soffit and fascia that we're replacing or need to replace. That's another corner you can see this is a corbel here on the front in this corner. And what it was a lot of this roofing wasn't put on properly, and they had weird gutters. These soffits, or the fascia board is actually on, this part right here is actually on an angle. Today they build fascia boards where they're straight, so it's easier to attach a gutter to. This is another shot of that same corner. We were looking at this front end, now we're looking at the other side of it. So these are all,
Why don't you go back to that last picture?
this one here.
Point out the rot and the splitting of the crown molding.
Yeah, so this was a 2-piece crown molding that was put on the house. There was a piece from here up to the roof, and then this long skinny piece underneath here, which, we, in our repair costs, we took a piece of it, sliced it, sent it out to have them give us a price on what it would be to remill it and make it look just like that, because if you're going to repair it, you're going to take off sections and, try to leave the spots that are still good. This would be the northwest corner of the front of the house, this being the west, this side over here being the north. Then this is obviously south side. South side over here, we have the same thing in this situation where this siding has been replaced because of probably when they removed this porch. You know, the green represents the areas where the soffits are rotted. This green through here and underneath the bay window and around represents siding that, because we have to reflash this, when they added these bay windows, they put the flashing over the top of the siding, which is not the proper way to do it. So we'll need to remove that much of that existing siding to reflash this.
Just to clarify too, the reason for that flashing being nailed over the old siding was after they re-roofed it, they put new aluminum siding on. So therefore it didn't affect the moisture content or whatever, moisture, rain getting into it. Once the siding is taken off now, that flashing is exposed, and there's no way it can be repaired without, you can't just caulk the flashing against the siding. The siding needs to go over the flashing. That's why it needs to be taken off.
And then, so this area here was actually an area that there was no siding when we removed the aluminum, because this was at one point part of a back porch, and there was steps on it. As a matter of fact, one of the pictures that Michael showed, you could actually see the steps coming off that back corner, but they enclosed that, I don't even know when, probably 60s or something. And this window here was a casement, aluminum clad, you know, a Marvin type window. So, this is that south side. Again, you can see that this siding is in pretty decent shape, and again, that's because we figure that they must have re-sided it. You can see these first few boards down here along the bottom. They must have redid at some point, probably when they ripped off all this porch. They sided up to a point and kind of stopped. And then, you know, because this siding here probably needed to be redone, they went all the way up from here. Most of the corners, because of the way they had gutters and flashing, are rotted, so this complete soffit, this soffit here all the way along, and that corresponds to our diagram that we showed you where the green areas that needs to be torn off and replaced. And then, you know, some of this siding through here we'd need to remove just so that we can re-roof this and also flash this properly along the bottom. That's another look at that same corner that I was showing you where this whole soffit has to go. Same thing. Then when you come around on this side, this siding, basically from about here down to somewhere in here is completely rotted, needs to come out. That's on a west picture that we have. The soffit here needs to go. This was taken off up top up here so that we could re-flash the roof in. That just shows a little bit closer on how the siding is, you know, in bad shape. This is a corner out right on the other side of the dormer. You can see the same thing. And again, these are all shown on the green where the soffits are bad and need to be replaced. This is that west elevation that I was telling you. This siding and this siding was removed so that we could re-flash and we could fix up this roof vent. This is that area where the roof kind of rotted the siding and the corner board and all that kind of stuff. And then these are the soffit areas that need to be replaced just from water damage.
You know, just for information also, that particular area, we are also going to have to replace some of the sheathing that's below that because the moisture got behind the siding, and there's some dry rot in that corner.
This
so
area
that'll
here.
have to be repaired, yes.
This is one of the corners on the south elevation. I think it's this corner right here, just to kind of show you the condition of what it is. I mean, that's not repairable, it has to be pulled off. Same thing here, this whole thing, and then probably back up this way some. This is that little corner and that, so that's the east elevation. Just some crown molding on that east elevation. This is the gable that we lowered. If you remember when we first came in, the design phase of it, we lowered the gable so that we could keep these corbels on the end. You know, you can see that you know needs to be removed. This is that same gable, and same thing here. You know, it's rotted up in this corner up in here. So you got some down here, some up here, And this, again, is that siding that we were talking about that was yellow on our thing that we removed so that we could flash the wall properly. And same, that's a shot of the same thing over here where this roof dies in. This part of the soffit over here, it's already got pieces missing that fell off. Just the corner. And then this is the north side of the church. Again, we're deciding that, you know, we figure was put on at some point. This siding we removed. It's not all of this. There's still some pieces here and there's some pieces here, but there was at one point a door right here. And then somebody had added a window at some point. Then they were both, then the door was taken out because there was a porch coming off this back at one point. And, the door was taken out and there was a window put in on this one, so there were two windows kind of close together, and you'll be able to see that on the other thing. And then these soffits are all pretty much, you know, need to be replaced. And this one here is completely sagging, and the roof rafters are actually, it's rotted off, and you'll be able to see that
Far
on
right end rafters.
on the picture. This is the inside corner, so this is like this, if you could kind of look around on that inside corner. You can see they just don't flash things right, and the water rolls off the roof and it runs right down the siding. I mean, you know, none of this is repairable. That's all got to come off. And then around, right in here is where there was a band board that ran in here where they used to have a roof over the porch, and there's actually tar and stuff. We have a picture that you can see here. So this band board ran here, and then when this water came down, it got underneath the band board and it rotted more on this corner. There was a little bit of siding between here and this window. So when we took the window out, this was rotted, and this was again, like a Marvin type, you know, window. So that's a better shot of that whole area. This was where there used to be a door. This plywood was actually here. We installed this piece because that was the size of the window that we took out. And, you know, again, we had to pull siding off of here to connect the house, the new part to the house, and this siding. And so, you know, when you're taking it off, some of it cracks and whatever, and this is just what's left. But, you know, honestly, once you know, we want to side this all the way across. So it's, you know, when you have a seam here and a seam here, it doesn't make much sense to, you know, leave that siding. And then down here, this is a band board that had completely rotted off that was over the top of the beams that they used when they moved the house. And you can see it runs down this way and is kind of rotted. And
Let's
that's
go
just,
back to that last picture too. Down at the bottom there where the new, where band board used to be, they didn't apply that back on once they moved the house and put it on the new foundation. The problem with doing that was there's no way now that's where the rim joist is sitting directly on the foundation, flush with the foundation. And without that band board being on there, you're not properly sealing the foundation to the rim joist. And then on top of the band board, you would bend a piece of metal flashing to lap up and under this new siding that would come down over the top of it. That's a common problem with the whole structure, really.
it's another look of that same area. This is some of the band board that runs around the bottom of the house, and that's what Mike was saying, it's not flashed well. This siding just butts up to it, and anywhere that there's cracks in it, the water gets behind it, and then it actually gets in, it runs down the inside wall of the basement. So basically, all the way around the bottom of the house, we gotta take all that off, and, you know, either, what you would wanna do is run new siding all the way down instead of having a band board, because that's what it probably was originally. The band board kind of a thing was just, it was easier for them to throw a 1x12 on there, take up the space. Then this is some of the soffits on that same side, which again are marked in the green, some of the gaps, just to show where we're at. This is the soffit where the major damage is, and it's actually, there's like a crack right here, and the soffit is actually sagging down. This is another look at that same soffit all the way down.
And what you're seeing there also, you see the dark patches that are on there. That's not just paint that's missing, it's actually wood that's rotted out behind it. Not behind the paint, but it's just rotted out wood.
So just to give you guys an idea of what we're talking about with the whole house, this is the measurements of the house. There's 8,400 lineal feet of siding. There's 440 lineal feet of soffit, crown molding, fascia board, 200 feet of corners. When you make a corner, it's a 2x6, like a 6-inch trim and a 4-inch trim. Then the door and window trim is 450 lineal feet. Soffit, again, like I said before, it's 440, which matches what the crown molding is. So this is all the materials that are on the house to re-side it new, or, you know, when they sided it originally, that's what material's there. If you take a look at what we have and where we're at, there's 8,400 lineal feet of siding. There's about 3,150 feet of it that need to be replaced. That's about 37%. You know, this is all pretty self-explanatory. 440 feet of total freeze board and fascia and soffit, and there's about 200 feet of it that's rotted that needs to be replaced. And that goes for the crown molding as well. You got the 2-piece crown molding, there's about 200 feet of that. And, you know, we have the percentages on there of what that is. Then, this is the cost estimates. I think this is the stuff that you were talking about and trying to understand. This is the estimates to repair. And I put together all the bids so that you could have them.
Why didn't we get this before today?
Well, let me make that clear. This is all the information that was given to you last month.
You have all this information. I just put it now nice and clear.
This is
so you
just
can understand,
basically put in a easier way to understand it.
making it easy to read.
Do you have an extra one?
Oh, sorry. So the siding bid is from Heinz Lumber. They use a company called Edmund Allen, and it makes their cedar siding. Comes out with a coat of primer, 2 coats of paint on it, and a 15-year warranty for the materials. So these numbers here correspond to the lineal footage. This was actually my siding guy's estimate, or my salesman's estimate. He went out and looked at it and put together the number, and, you know, he came out with 11,500. And that is without the crown molding. So if you look at the Heinz bid, it says crown molding, the 2 profiles, you know, $0. So the next page is an email from him, because he had to send the crown molding out to get me pricing on the crown molding. And you can read the email. It's $35 a lineal foot for the larger piece and $15 a lineal foot for the smaller piece, which is represented in our number there. So there's about $10,000 in crown molding, which gives you about $21,000 in material. The next page on this is the bid for the labor. The labor, $19,000. The next page is the bid for the paint, with stripping it, hand scraping, whatever he needs to do to get it scraped down to bare wood. Following all the lead regulations is $27,000, and then $12,000, and then he's got the primer included in that, and then $12,000 to actually do the painting. And then our alternative, I talked to the district manager at Sherwin-Williams, and I asked him about an epoxy finish or a way to just scrape the building as best we could, leave it on, and somehow make it smooth, because, you know, that's the whole thing, is making it look smooth again, and not have that peely look underneath the paint. And he said that there are some products out there, but they really don't have good luck with them, and he didn't know anybody that even used them. He did give me one guy that I called, a painter out of Naperville. And I mean, this is the district manager for Sherwin-Williams. I mean, they are, you know, one of the largest paint companies in the world. And the painter that I talked to was, first of all, too busy. He wouldn't even come out and give me a price. Second of all, he said basically the same thing, that the epoxy finishes just don't work, they don't stay on. You're trying to put a little thin coating to match the thickness of a millimeter or, 1/10 of a millimeter of paint, and you're thinking that that's gonna stay. If any of you guys have ever tried to patch concrete or put Bondo on a car, the thinner the layer, the thinner the coating, the less likely it's gonna stick. So, we just really had no luck on it. The one thing that we did find that seemed like a pretty good product was Rhino Shield, and this is a ceramic-based product. And they can kind of scrape it down, but, get it down to where it's, decent. And it doesn't fill the voids completely, but they said that it'd be 90% smooth. That was his comment to me. And you can see he's 46,000. So in that situation, we'd be replacing $39,000 with $46,000. So, and then if we were to repair the home this way, the only way that we really found a way to give it the proper barrier from moisture, and considering how the gaps are and that there's no paper underneath most of the house, was the closed cellulose foam. And the last page is an email from my insulation guy, Metro Insulation. He's already given us a bid to insulate the whole house, and just to upgrade the exterior walls to this closed foam cellulose is $8,200. So those are all costs that are real costs to the church if they look at repairing what is existing and what the siding is. They're all backed up. You had all of these. It was just that it was kind of given to you hodgepodge at the last meeting. So therefore, I wanted to make sure it was nice and clear and concise and you could follow it. It's right in order coming down with the slide here. So then if we go to the next one, we're looking at replacement. So the replacement, the materials are about $28,000. The labor to remove, which I don't have that on here. The labor to remove is $2,500, and I apologize, that one I do not have, but I know I copied it. I must have not stapled it in. And that's from one of our carpenter contractors to tear off what's existing. Then the replacement bid is right here, $26,000, and that is to go back and basically put on all of these materials that we have listed right here, which the lineal footages and all of that stuff are back on. Oh, did I? Yeah, right here. So that $26,000 500 bid is for that material list, which is right there from Heinz Lumber.
I'd just like to clarify one thing too on the labor line of the cost estimate to replace. The removal cost is based on removing it with the EPA standards, which involves taking the siding off. The men have to use a respirator. Typically, though, when you remove the siding, you're not cutting or sawing it, so the dust is at a minimum. It's just the flaking part that you have to worry about. That's mitigated by placing visqueen in the area that they're working on the ground. They pull the siding off, they place it in the visqueen, bundle it up, tape it, and then place it in a dumpster. And one of the fortunate things that we have going for us is there's no cost for waste removal of it. We have a contractor that is working with us, providing all of our dumpster and disposal fees, and he's handling that at no cost to us.
Even though they would be dealing with lead paint?
Yes.
Yeah, he owns the company, he's a parishioner of the church, and he already has removed some stuff that we had taken off, and then, said he's got no problem taking anything that we have. So basically, you can see, there's from 87 to 57, it's about a $30,000 difference. Oops. I don't want to touch that, I'll make it disappear. The next step for us is obviously we need to have some kind of solution with this exterior siding, because we have to order the siding, get it on, get the project moving again. We have to insulate and drywall and do all those things, and we can't do any of that without, having an answer on what we can do with the siding. Originally we wanted to be open for back to school, but that was not quite feasible. And then now we were shooting for the Christmas walk, which may or may not happen. I don't know. We'd like to, we'd love to be open for that because we were looking at doing some events and things in the actual new Larrabee house on the lower level with the community. And we're just trying to keep on schedule and get the project back moving. So hopefully that answered a lot of your questions. I don't think it was exactly in Michael's form, but personally, just knowing, nothing against Michael, he gave it to us and whatever, but that would have been confusing to go over. I think that what we have here was kind of clear, concise. It showed you exactly what was what. You can see the bids. So I'll leave it up to you guys for questions.
I have a question and a comment too. My apologies to Michael. Here I thought that I did receive all the information that I requested in the last meeting, and the glaring error to me is if the goal is to preserve historic materials, I remember the discussion from last month, how much of my fundamental question apparently is still unanswered. Of the original structure, how much of the original siding is still retained, which is not indicated on those elevations, and how much of it is reusable?
Well, yeah, it is. That's what we showed was 3,100 lineal feet of siding that we feel need to be replaced.
Okay.
There's 8,400 lineal feet.
But that means,
3,100 lineal feet needs to be replaced.
okay, so the
So that's-
3,100 lineal feet, all the rest of it is original siding to that structure?
No,
No,
Okay,
that's what our,
so there's my fundamental question.
what's the point of
How
that?
much of the original siding is present on the structure currently? Those elevations do not indicate that. And the second thing, in the color coded, it says not original. Michael's notations say that some of the siding, I guess in your research, was replaced at an earlier period to the 1960. How many different vintages of siding are on there? What are the percentages? How much of each one needs to be replaced and how much can be retained?
right.
That's
Well-
what Michael's table did ask, and it is still a fundamental question to me. I see that and it says not original. Is that all 1960 siding? Or again, well, I'm repeating myself, but according to Michael's notation, there was other repairs and replacement that occurred prior to 1930, if I'm not mistaken, in your literature. So that does not tell me how old the rest of the stuff is. Is it worth preserving or not?
Well,
There's
Can I
a lot
answer
of
that
unknowns there for me.
We realize that, but the problem is, the only way that we can tell that the existing siding is existing is because it's been nailed with cut nails.
Okay,
And obviously it's in really bad, a lot of that is in bad shape.
okay,
Now, the existing siding that is replaced, it's got a much better finish on it, and it was applied with shorter box head
Galvanized.
galvanized nails.
and black paper behind
Now,
it.
we don't obviously have dating experience.
I
as far as-
understand, but all of the yellow then is the 60
No,
period?
only where, what we put on here was not original siding, was where we
Right.
felt it was a newer siding. Michael even said in his little presentation, starting up, I have the notes on it right here, that changes happen, and sometimes they're historic, sometimes they're not.
Right.
If I'm putting a 4-inch lap siding on in 1951 versus 1923, is that a significant change that we need to be all up in arms about and have historic, that we need to save? I don't think so. And we don't know. From being a builder for 30 years and him being for 50, 60, 70 years, no, I'm just kidding.
Not that many.
We think that basically this end of the house going all the way around, this is the north side,
Right.
the west side, the front side where the porch was, that up there and this around had to be replaced when that parishioner came in and decided they wanted to rip the front porch off of the thing, which we know, that was much later, so, but again, we don't know what's historic, what's not historic. He just flat out said that it's hard to determine that.
Well, but that's what we're here to do.
I got you.
That-
And that's what I'm
that's
trying to
And
tell you. I
I'm
don't
gonna,
know. I don't
one of
know
my
those
questions was exactly what Commissioner Stasens was.
answers. Right,
I see all that orange. I understand where it was missing. That's pretty obvious.
yeah, right.
But how did you determine that all of that was not considered original and was not,
Because of the nailing.
I physically took off approximately 100 lineal feet in each combination of the whole house in areas that I thought did not seem to be original to me. And I could tell right away by prying the siding out what kind of nails were used to fasten
Okay.
that siding. That's about
That makes sense,
the
yeah.
clue that I
Yeah,
had.
that makes sense.
And also, I was able to find on the back side of the siding,
Like this piece here is one that he took out, this piece here, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
That makes sense.
To figure out what we were dealing with.
and on the siding that was original, you had the much larger cut nails used to apply it. And on the back side of that siding, it had a very rough circular milling mark to it. So the saw that was actually cutting those pieces left a distinctive mark. On the newer areas, that siding, when I took it off, didn't have those marks on it. It was much smoother. Obviously, the milling process must have gotten better from 1859 to, say, 1920. So that siding was cut differently.
May I ask, the siding that has the circular saw marks, where on the diagrams did you find that?
We found it on the front elevation
Yeah, see.
below the porch. And we also found it on, where'd you go back
The
to?
west
Go to the west.
was the first one, I
Yeah.
think, I hope.
You're a long way to
Now
I
I'm
think you're
going.
going the wrong way.
Yeah, you're right, I am. Sorry.
Okay. The original siding is the lower on the front. Those,
That's where the
There.
porch was removed. You found
that-
what you call original siding. Can we say 1850s? Is that what you're meaning by
Whenever
original?
the home was built.
Okay, 1850s, okay. Is on the front, under where the new porch is, the side, roof is now. How about above it?
Above it is the new stuff. That's the
What-
point.
What do you mean by new?
It's
had
not,
this-
it's got the different nails, it's got black paper behind it, it doesn't have the rough,
Okay, are we talking 1920s?
I couldn't tell you
We
that.
don't know. I mean, how, does anybody know?
I-
don't
I
know
just
how,
don't
I
know.
don't really know how we would find that out.
Mr. Lambert, what were you
First of all,
saying?
I think that they're giving you their honest answer. They don't know, so to keep asking that question is not going to further the discussion.
Okay.
The point being, though, I think is getting mixed up here again, or not mixed up, but should be clarified, is, again, and going back to my initial presentation, that has to do with a lot, I think you should quit using the term original. I think what you're trying to determine is, we know there were two major construction campaigns on this house. 1854 when it was built, and then circa 1923 when that major remodeling was done. The work they've referred to or identified that is other later that may be tar paper or maybe have a lumber stamp or something, whatever it is in the back, that is a condition of repair, not from a major building campaign with an intent to create a particular design.
Right.
That's repair or removal or maintenance or
Right.
change in aesthetics, what have you. So I think with the question I think you're trying to get to understand, if I may jump in here, is what is related to the historic, intentional redesign of the home or the original construction of the home, and what is post that work?
Right.
I'm not sure they have the answer for you tonight, I don't know, but it doesn't sound to me like what you've been saying, that you have determined that. But I think that's what you're trying to get to from what I'm hearing the conversation, just to
Well, I would
clarify.
add that I don't think we can determine that. We're not, I don't think you can do carbon dating on siding. I mean, we don't know when,
Well, I would look, I guess, using your methodology, I'd first look for round holes versus cut nails,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
what-
you know what
that's what we-
period.
Right.
So without a
exactly what-
lot of investigation, you could at least narrow, you may not get exactly the year, but you certainly could determine periods based on the fasteners.
Right, and that's what we did, and these fasteners up here are round galvanized
Oh,
nails with
they are?
round
Oh, I
heads.
thought, that's the point of confusion.
Everything above this roof line and some below it is
According to
round.
your elevation
Yes,
was-
those, where we put on there, not original siding, anywhere that it's marked not original siding, it's because it is a round head nail. You can see them right here in this row. Those are round head nails, they're popping out, I pulled several of them out, there was a door here, and, Michael said that, oh, well, it's not a major construction. Well, ripping off a three-sided porch on the front of a house, that's pretty major. Pretty sure that if I was gonna do it today, the building department would make me get a permit. And typically, when I do that, if I rip the roof off, there's no siding in that attic space where the roof was, so I would side from that point up. So what we've seen does, it does support what we're showing, but, is it 19, I don't know. All I can tell you is that that's when the porch was ripped off.
Right.
Okay.
May I just clarify that? I didn't say it wasn't a major
Well, yeah,
project.
you
What I
kinda
said
did.
was it was not part of an intentional redesign of the home.
Well,
There's a slight-
they
there's a-
didn't
there-
like it.
No,
They
no,
wanted
no,
it off. It was a
there's
redesign.
There's a difference there, so I'm not
But it's,
I'm
right,
not saying it's
it's
not major
historic,
work.
that's
I'm
not
just saying,
historic anyway, so, we're
But,
trying to put that back,
it-
the porch.
Okay, all right, now I'd like to go back to our previous meeting. Towards the end of the previous meeting, I believe that there was conversation about removing siding from other facades and patching the front and most of the west with the unspecified thought that the north and the east would get new siding. What happened to that idea?
well, basically, it's not feasible. I went out there when I took some of this other siding off, and I took approximately 60 lineal feet off from various parts, various lengths. And of that 60 lineal feet, I determined that in order to reuse that 60 lineal feet, we would have to cut off the ends that were cracked or any splits that would occur in those pieces that were removed. And I basically came up with, of that 60 feet, we lost approximately 24 feet to scrap, waste, cracks, to damage.
The
So that
larger
basically-
nails, because those areas have the larger
Yes,
cut
I
nails.
understand that.
So basically, we lost 40% of what siding is there, and there is not enough siding left that we could preserve to complete, we could complete the lower part, repair the lower front porch, but doubtful that we would have enough to do the upper front porch, the above the front porch. I just don't see that we would have enough. if that formula that I have holds true. And I kind of think, being an ex-cider, when I first got out of college, that was one of the first things I ever did was put cedar siding on. I probably have put 10,000 lineal feet of cedar siding on in my life. And the last thing you want to start with is a cracked end somewhere.
Looking at your presentation towards the end, where you have a breakdown of what the proposed scope is, you indicate that there's 3,150 linear feet that needs to be replaced. But what you're asking or what you're proposing here is to replace everything?
Well,
How do we go from one to the other?
Well, let me get to that page.
right here.
I think he's referring to the next page with the length of removal or
Well,
repairing.
this is the,
Yeah.
total
Okay.
8,400, and then there's 3,150.
So that means that there's roughly 5,250 lineal feet still on the wall that has to be chemically
Sanded,
removed,
primed, scraped.
sanded off, encapsulated, tinted, and that's where the costs differentiate between it's less expensive and more efficient to replace than it is to try to do the restoration of it and patch. And a lot of that is based on the lead paint issues that we've got, and to remove that.
So we have 62% of the siding that does not have to be replaced.
Yes, but it's also, that 62% includes the portion that we feel is, over the top of the porch with the round nails and may not be, we know for a fact that it's not anywhere near as old as the other stuff. So,
But
and that's a good percentage of the house. I mean, we should have probably calculated that. I guess I could do it real quick.
That was my point,
But-
what percentage of that overall
Well, I
on
mean,
this structure exists?
it's basically everything above the porch
Yeah.
and the one wall underneath where the door was on the lower part of the porch. So that's considerable amount. I mean,
But I think the thing to keep in mind, we heard earlier, was that elements are a period of their own time.
I think I can
And
do
even at 1960,
right?
it's
It's still
It's-
siding that could be
almost
put
60
Yeah.
years old.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
And the wood that would have been, cut and provided for siding in the 60s is considerably better than the wood that is being cut and provided for siding now. Because the cedar that's being produced now, the grain is much wider and the wood is not nearly as good as the older wood is.
I have a question. Where did you get those statistics from, or how can you make that statement?
Well, because in historic preservation societies, people talk about the grain in older wood.
Well, do you know that horizontal cut cedar is still available? Do you know that particular
That's
graining of the
not-
wood is not any different than it was?
I believe that's not the question right now.
Well, I think if you make a statement
think
that
we're-
states that you
we're
know
trying
something
to
that might not
discuss-
exactly be accurate, then I think it's
We're
the
trying to
point.
discuss whether or not it is worth keeping the siding that is in decent condition still on the house. I think that's what this topic is all about right now.
I'm still a little lost on the rings. I mean, I understand the rings. I have a biochemistry degree, and the rings are actually the growth, phloa, and cambria that are directly underneath the bark. And it brings the water and up to the tree leaves, and then it takes the,
Mr. Silvestri,
Yes.
I don't mean to be rude, but we've got a lot more to talk about today, so could we?
okay, well, just so you understand that the width of the rings, I mean, I don't, see, and who knows if this siding was even cedar? In the 1800s, do you think they trucked cedar? There's no cedar trees around
Yeah, it's
here.
not even cedar
Did
siding.
they, a lot of it's probably not cedar siding. It was probably some type of wood that was grown here locally. So, We're talking about cedar going back on it, which is what everybody uses now, and it accepts paint well, it holds a lot longer. As you know, it has anti-rot properties just when it's put up naturally, so.
So have we answered questions on the siding? Have you gotten most of your?
Well, I would like to talk about this lead remediation for a second, or I have a couple questions on that, if it's part of the estimate, and so there's no way that we can just simply, you can simply just paint over the existing using wood filler, and, because caulking is mentioned on there prior to painting anyway. I'm not understanding the need to remove, encapsulation is simply that, it's covering it up. But why can't we simply do that with 2 coats of Sherwin-Williams?
Well, part of the fact is that, yes, there's parts of that might not take as much, be as difficult to remove the existing paint, but the great proportion of that, if you saw the pictures with the paint flaking off and chips that are, 2 inches by 3 inches, you can scrape that off, but then you're left with another chunk that's adhered to the wood that involves sanding and a mechanical removal.
Right, but given your numbers, 37% would need to be replaced anyway, because where the paint did come off, it's probably rotted or non-repairable.
Correct.
So that seems to indicate the majority of that would be new wood or replacement wood, so that there's not a remediation problem there to begin with. So my question is, we can't simply replace the boards that are in need of repair and repaint without this expensive step of remediation, because that's the whole beauty of encapsulation, is you don't have to do anything with it. And it seems like there's almost a combination in your estimate that it's a little bit of both.
Well, I mean, the quote from the painter is, to do exactly that. I mean, encapsulate the part that is, and the new part is actually gonna come out pre-primed and pre-painted anyway, because it's white,
Right,
so we're gonna
right.
get it pre-done. And then he'll probably end up painting over the whole thing again. I
Sure.
mean, that's what his bid for 12 grand was, to paint over the whole thing. So, I mean, he did take that into consideration. I mean, that's, the rest of it that needs to be scraped down and cleaned up, the part that's good. I mean, the rotted part and the part that is not gonna adhere well to the paint, that's the 3,100 lineal feet.
I think also to answer your question, Commissioner Stazen, they made the point in their presentation that it was kind of glossed over pretty quickly, but aesthetics was part of the concern. That's when you were talking about the scraping and the cleaning, and you talked about the epoxy repair, which is not really the way to use epoxy to try to smooth something out. That's not the way the wood epoxies are meant to be used in this type of project. But anyway, the point they made was they were trying to get a smooth, finished look. What you're suggesting, with encapsulation, and again, it's an aesthetics issue that people struggle with all the time,
Sure.
is whether or not you can live with a building that look, when you get up close to it, that has chips in different layers. And from what I was hearing from the presentation, you're trying to get a very smooth, unified
Yeah, they'd like it to look,
We're just trying to get
So I think that's where, to answer your question, that's part of where the lead encapsulation issue comes from, because the desire for the aesthetics.
Right, but for 27,000, that's a lot of aesthetics.
yeah, well, come scrape a house, come out and scrape that. We'll have a scraping party and we'll invite all you guys out. It's a lot of work. I mean, yeah, right, one house is enough, right, Michael? I mean, I mean, and I gotta tell you, a lot of guys I called were like, I don't even wanna bid it, so.
So from your perspective, then, there's only 2 viable options.
Well, I think these are the
Yes.
most viable options, and you can see the difference in the price, and obviously that's where the church is at. They're looking at, the financial hardship of it, and, all the facts considered about the house and the changes that have been made and where it's been moved and all the things that have happened to it over the years. I don't know how, I guess it's my opinion, but I don't think it's that historic to keep the siding when you have such a difference in cost. I mean, you're asking the parishioners to, come up with a lot of extra money.
I think that one of the questions that Commissioner Warner asked last month was how much of the house would be left, how much of the original historic house would be there after everything was replaced. And I think we were right down to a couple of corbels, and then you even said that maybe those might have to be replaced.
Well,
So-
no, we just said that they need to be,
They need to be refurbished.
they need to be refurbished. We're not, that's not even in our scope of work here. That's refurbishing what's there, and if it's impossible to refurbish, meaning if we remove one and it literally crumbles in our hand, we would have to make
Duplicate.
we'd have a pattern, we'd make a duplicate of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's preservation, there's restoration, and there's reconstruction. I mean, I applaud your reconstruction of the porch, that's great. I'm not seeing a lot of preservation, and that's, what we're about here. And I had one question about your crown molding, too, and this kind of goes to the restoration part of it. You had a $3,000 and $7,000, so a $10,000 cost for blades to mill the new moldings. But then that didn't show up in your other costs, so are you not using correct moldings then?
No, it's in the packet.
Is it? Mm-hmm. So you are using the correct moldings,
So
so you're paying you're doing the milling cost no matter what?
No. If we were to replace the crown molding, we would buy a crown molding that's similar size. It might be a one-piece crown that you can get at today's
So
price.
basically, you're not doing it exactly as it was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about on the repair, if we were.
Yeah, no, if you repair, you have to use the
Complete
blades to
replacement.
match it.
No,
But
complete
when you do
replacement,
your
the crown
reconstruction,
molding that's figured in there at $2,200. If you look at the cost estimate to replace siding, it's $2,200. That would be a crown molding that would be similar in size. It would be a one-piece instead of a two-piece. And, that's readily available for $5 a lineal foot, $4 or $5 a foot.
But, I guess the argument for a preservation is that it's only original once. Once you rip that off, it's not the same, even, you're using new materials, so.
Correct, but I mean, there's a lot of the soffit and crown molding that's just not reusable. I mean, there's 50% of the soffit that needs to go, and that includes the crown molding. So 50% of the crown molding is gonna be gone anyway. So to replace that 50% with the exact replica, and what we did with that was I took a piece that happened, that was rotted, we peeled it off and got it back to where it was good. I cut a thin slice on my saw, put it on a copier, copied it and sent it to these guys, and because then they get the exact dimensions of both pieces, and that's what they came back with on the lineal foot price,
Right.
So,
If it's reconstruction and not restoration, to me, it's wrong. That's just personal view.
So
I
then,
would spend the extra dollars on, if I had to replace that to.
well, I mean,
replicate it completely. Do it right.
again, that's, the church is looking at the dollars and they're seeing 57 on that one, and they're seeing 87 on that one, and it has to do with the crown and the other items that need to be done in order to do the restoration preservation as you're considering it. And even when we do that, we're still gonna have 37% of the siding that's not exact, not historic. We're gonna have 50% of the soffit and the crown molding that's not historic. So where are we cutting our losses here,
I'd like to add one other thing. When the church started this, I wasn't even part of the congregation, but in any remodeling process, until you get to the bare bones of what you have, you don't know. And the entire exterior of this house was covered with aluminum. The budget was never set up to even think about tearing the siding off. It was set up simple, repaint it and be done with it. And to have the damage that is there now, you could not foresee any of that until the siding was taken off and the soffit was taken off, the capping of the window trim taken off.
I would like to, on your 87 there, you've got the 8200 for your cell phone. That's insulation. You don't have any, which increases the performance of the envelope. You don't have any insulation number on your tear-off.
Yeah.
And so either that should come out of there.
No.
Or you should add insulation number to your new construction number.
No, unfortunately, no, what it is in the other bid, I have to insulate the home anyway with R19 in the walls.
Right.
So the insulation bid that we would do no matter what was X amount of dollars, just because I know it,
So
I'll
this
tell
is
you.
an
This is
addition.
an additional amount to upgrade from the R19 bat to the foam.
Okay.
So
But in the other-
it's exclusively to that.
But in the tear-off, there is, I thought I saw another number in your estimate to do something else with insulation in your.
No, I think that the guy that prepared it was just showing that, you don't
Okay.
have to do the closed cell foam because, for the vapor barrier, because there's actually a vapor barrier that's put on by the cider in his $26,000, which is right here, 28 square of house wrap.
Okay. Well, you know how it is in the business.
Yep,
The
you gotta
change
apples to
order
apples.
always adds.
Yeah.
But there's never a credit for the other side of it.
Yeah, no, that's just, that's closed cell foam is very expensive.
Okay,
I mean,
thank you.
yep.
I mean, I guess what originally came before us and what we approved was the restoration. And now what I'm hearing is they want to come back and replace it all.
Yes.
And SOI Standard 6, reuse rather than replace, I would have to vote against it. Given the condition, I went out there over the weekend, I went out there today. I understand the 3150 needs to be replaced, but to approve a complete tear-off and a replacement, I couldn't vote for that.
Just so everybody's clear, we're talking about 37% of the siding, so let's just say we said, okay, fine, we'll go with this right here. 37% of this siding is going to be not historic, plus possibly over the top, not possibly, we know, as people that have been in the business a long time, over the top of the porch and underneath the porch in those several areas are much newer. 50% of the soffit, fascia, and crown molding is going to be completely new. So it's not historic. There's no historic meaning to it, no nothing. Yes, it'll match the profile exactly, but there's nothing there. And there's a $30,000 extra cost to the church. I mean, to me, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense. I mean, I understand the commission's, you're talking about a lot, 31% of it is not going to be original anyway. Not to mention what is over the top of the porch and underneath the porch where the doors were replaced, and on the back side, on the north side, where the porches were ripped off and the doors were in and out and all that moved around, and 50% of the soffit and fascia and crown molding, which is the detail that gives it the look. So,
But your estimate here says 45, it doesn't say 50.
okay, 200 feet on 440 feet, that's
I know that's
45,
being-
45% is pretty close to 50. So you're right, 45%. So 45% of the soffit and fascia will not be new.
Excuse me, I have a question to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lambert, this house at the present moment is considered to be significant. Once all this work is done that the church wants to do, won't we have to change that classification? Won't it become non-contributing?
The categorization of all the buildings in the historic district is in the process of being resurveyed, as you know. A recommendation from staff will be made to the city council, who has to adopt that survey, just as was done in 1999. My recommendation would be if it's all new material, especially if it's not matching historic profiles,
Right.
my recommendation on this particular property would be that it become non-contributing. So going from significant to non-contributing.
And I would agree with that myself.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second, though? I mean, what we're proposing, though, is, with the exception of the crown molding, because of the additional cost to mill it, we will be matching the profile, the width of the trim, the look of the soffits. The corbels will be refurbished so they stay together for the next 150 years. The only thing that is different is the milling of the crown.
Well, that's not necessarily true, and if you look at the Secretary of the Interior standards, the standards would say that if it's not the preservation of the majority of the materials or the majority of the materials are in situ right now, then it's a reconstruction, and reconstructions typically are not identified as significant structures in a historic district. It's essentially a new building is what you're ending up with.
Is there a percentage or something that they use to determine that? I mean, like I said before, we're at 37 and 45% of the two major structures on the project anyway that are gonna be new.
Right.
So
It's-
is it gonna lose that status even if we repair it like this?
Well, at this point, I think there's a lot of things that are factored into it. We talked about this when you came in with the window request. That was a concern. So the exterior of this home is going to be over 50% replaced by your own numbers, whether you keep the 37% replacement of the siding, you're still looking at overall, you're well over 50% replacement by the time you factor in the windows, the door, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, staff makes lots of recommendations. Sometimes they're upheld and sometimes not, but my recommendation would be that if all the windows except for 6 are being replaced, if there's
The leaded
yes,
glass. Well,
there's 6 sash being preserved.
yeah, but
according
the
to-
bottom of the whole sash is new and the top,
Right,
and
right,
then
but-
we're just fixing the glass, so it's all new window with just the old glass in it.
I'll have to go back and look at that motion, but I don't think that's what the motion was, but we'll look at that.
But there's
My
no
po-
other way to
my-
do
my-
that.
my-
There's no other way to do that.
The point to answer your question
Okay,
is,
go ahead.
that there's going to be much more than 50% of the building will be new construction. Especially, again, one of the notes I made, and I was going to wait till everybody had asked their questions, but you had commented that the old fascias are an angle. My question was, is it being proposed to straighten those out so you can
No.
hang new fascia, or new, traditional gutters, or not traditional, but modern gutters on it. So those would be the kinds of questions. The question about whether the water table was there or not, again, we have a historic photograph from 1925, I believe, if I remember right, I could go back and look at it. I think there was a water table there, so continue the site. So I think you're getting down to details of what the reconstruction may look like. And I think all those things factor into whether or not it is a significant building or not. If you're not matching the historic profiles in the moldings, if you're not, if it's a built-up two-piece molding, whether it's molded as one or two pieces, all those little details add up. And that is what we base our evaluations on. There's certainly homes that have had major restorations done that have had significant material replacement, but it's been done in kind. They've cut knives to match the exact moldings and profiles, what have you. Those are the types of things that when we're surveying the district that we're looking to see what is there or not. So again, whether or not the city council agrees with my assessment when I finish this survey, that's up to them. But my recommendation is if this is approved to replace all the siding and use stock moldings and replace the door and replace the windows, et cetera, my recommendation would be that it's a non-contributing building in the district.
I have another question, though, just a comment. I mean, then in our first, not my first presentation, but we first went into this saying that we wanted to bring the building back to historic perspective, as we were going to add the porch back on. Does that have no significance at all, meaning from a historical standpoint? Because now it is all new, that, it had been taken off, now we were adding it back on? Is that an irrelevant
If you were
factor?
designing it as a new porch, it would, but since it's a restoration of something that did exist, so that, by secretary standards, that's allowable, and that's
But still-
applauded,
but still-
actually. I mean,
so
it's
it was a
Still,
different
it's
design.
completely new, though. I mean, that has no,
So
I guess I'm
Well,
confused on.
You know, I
the
think you'd go
standards.
around town and you'd find other buildings too that have had missing parts that have been replaced over the years, you know, and restored back to original. But the standard they were referring to is Standard 6, and it was deteriorated features shall be repaired rather than replaced. When severity requires replacement, new shall match old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities. And that's one of our standards that we use as a guideline. So, I mean, we're, you know, a small feature such as a profile is actually kind of a big deal.
Right. So, Michael, can I ask you a question quick?
Yes,
So,
you may.
so what you just said then, you're talking about if we repair you're talking about my repair estimate, which is, you know, where we're replacing 37% of the siding and 45% of the soffit and fascia and crown molding and all that stuff. Then the house is more than 50% replaced because of windows and this and that and doors and all the other things. So is that what you're saying? Or you're saying if we take all the siding off?
I'm saying if you removed everything and started new, like the proposal is to replace everything, that would be my recommendation.
So there's three issues there as far as reestablishing what was existing. One is the band board that was originally, you had another term for it.
A water table?
Water table board. So if that water table board is reapplied, and also if the, there was one other, I'm sorry, I didn't take notes when you spoke that. It was the water board and also the,
I was asking about the fascia just only because it was mentioned
On
about
an
it's
angle.
historically
No.
angled, and I was just,
Yeah, that's the rafter cut. The
yeah, I don't
rafters are
think
cut
we were,
that
I
way,
don't
so
think.
that stays the same.
That stays the same. That's not, he was making a comment to compare how it's done now as to
no,
what
I understood
it
that.
is.
I was just trying to clarify what the
No,
intent
we did not
was.
change the cut of the rafters. And I think the other one is, the big concern is the milling of the fascia, crown.
Well, I think, again, all the details of the fascia, and then I think at the last meeting, the commissioners that raised the question because it was mentioned that the window trim was going to be factory applied clad. And I wanted to know-
We changed that.
Okay,
That's
okay, but
coming out.
Well, that hasn't been clarified yet, but that was one of the concerns last week, or last month, because that was
misspoke on that.
that's fine. So that's clear for all the commissioners now, because that was a concern you had.
Say that again?
The, last month, and as Mr. Sweeney has just said, it was a misstatement, but the statement was made that the windows would come with a clad trim piece.
Right.
And several of the commissioners were questioning, because that wasn't what the understanding was, and that's being corrected now, so that's good information for you to have. So it will be a wood or wood product.
As opposed to
trim
clad,
piece.
it's now a wood product.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll match the same width, the same thickness of what the existing window trim was.
So,
I think I myself would have appreciated being told that upfront.
well, again, in defense of any applicant who comes here, I mean, one of my jobs is to make sure everybody's getting the story and the information out. So if somebody, I don't think that was an intentional oversight. I
Yeah, I
just
don't
wanted to
think-
bring
I
that
just don't
out to
think
everybody.
it
so
wasn't
that-
communicated well enough, that's all.
Like I said, that's.
I think it was mentioned and was glossed over, and like I was sitting in the audience on that one, and I was like, no, that's not right, but, you know, it was water under the bridge.
And again, that's why I take the notes and try to figure out what everybody's saying here. So, I'm just looking at my notes because I had a couple. Oh, when you were mentioning Commissioner Stasen about, and just for the clarification, you're talking about an $8,200 upgrade for our interior vapor barrier. Closed cell foam is actually a vapor barrier. Tyvek is not a vapor barrier, it's a water and air barrier. So I think that you make a point, Commissioner Stasen, there's probably some kind of a credit or adjustment that needs to be made between the numbers. I don't think it's going to be a significant number that's going to change any of these significantly, but Tyvek is, or a building wrap is acting much differently than a closed cell insulation. They're doing two different things in a building system.
Well,
So-
but the fact that we have 2-inch gaps in some area because of the undersheeting, that's why we have to use the closed cell foam, or we want to be able to put Tyvek on it. So maybe vapor barrier is the wrong term, but it's exactly 100%, and there is no credit for it, because if I don't peel off the siding, how am I going to stop air infiltration from blowing into the house?
I'm not debating what.
No, but
why
you're
you're
trying.
doing. No, what I'm trying to do is.
You're trying to put a spin on it
No,
to say that there
no,
might be a
Mr.
little
Silvestri,
difference in
what
the
I'm trying to do
numbers.
is that we're recorded here and we're videotaped, and
And that's
when this
great.
question comes up, I just want to make sure it's clear that
Clarify.
everybody understands it.
Got
I'm
it.
not trying to put anybody on the spot. That wasn't my intention. I want to make it clear that they act differently, and so it's on the record and clear that everybody understands that.
But from our standpoint, that's what it's for.
no.
It's to close those gaps, and that's why we made it in the presentation. We talked about it. We talked about the undersheeting and what it looked like in the gaps.
Yeah, and I think everybody understood that. I just wanted to make it clear, because again, we get questioned on the most minuscule of things down the road. So,
Gotcha.
and then the other thing I did want to point out to the commissioners, and they've withdrawn this part of it, but there's been a bid for Rhino Shield as a painting product, a ceramic painting product. That is not an approved painting system for historic buildings according to the Secretary of Interior standard. It is not a reversible paint system.
Really?
And
They
it does-
they told me, because I asked them about that, and when he came out, he said, oh, we've done all kinds of historic buildings in Aurora and all over the place.
They do, and then they become they become unhistoric, so.
Well, to
it's
me,
not-
it sounded like a great thing, because it was really thick, it has a fire resist rating, it has all kinds of stuff,
So anyway,
but it's expensive.
but Rhino Shield is not, again, it's not a reversible paint product, so it's not considered to meet the Secretary of Interior standards.
That makes sense.
And then I just wanted to clarify something, again, I don't know who your Sherwin-Williams rep is, but the question that epoxy repair isn't a good solution on the building. When it was described that it being used as a skim coat, that's not how epoxy products are intended to be used. Epoxies are meant to fill gaps, fill holes, and there's different kinds of epoxy fillers out that are meant for to expand and contract like wood and to be structurally sound like wood and increase structural strength. So I would totally agree if a representative is saying that to use as a skim coat isn't appropriate, it is absolutely 100% correct. The application of epoxy repairs and preservation, when done to rebuild profiles, rebuild small sections of damaged wood, has about a 40-year history. They have a great history in the preservation industry. So I just wanted to clarify that again. I'm not saying that your guy gave you bad information, but used as a skim coat, it will not work.
No, we were looking
But used as a
we were looking to make that siding look like it should, nice and smooth. We don't want a product when it's done, we have this different layers of paint and, where you just scrape it and
There
try
are
and
like
paint it.
penetrating epoxies that would be a perfect application, say, for the corbels. If you have weak
Yeah,
wood,
and
I
that
mean,
kind of stuff we would
is
use.
something, right? That
That-
would be
And that's what we would use something to do, if we pull them apart and they're cracked and whatever. And actually, one of the pictures that I have, you can actually see where it looks like somebody filled one of those corbels with epoxy anyway, which is in the, I just happened to get it in the presentation.
There's some of it looks like Mondo, and then
Yeah,
there's
right,
some of
yeah.
it that actually soaks into the wood and, really
Yeah.
makes it hard. Are we getting to any point where we can say are we reaching any kind of a compromise here, or are we, do we need more information, less information? What are we doing here?
Could I just let one person speak? He's on the, his name is Jim Dickerson. He's here tonight. He's on the-
If you're finished, he was actually next on the list. So if you guys.
If you guys don't have anything else,
Anybody have any more questions?
I would like to say just one thing. Looking at a historic house and noticing that the paint is not even, is not smooth, is an excellent indication that you're looking at a piece of history. And I personally do not feel that that's a detriment. I feel that that is part of the joy of looking at historic properties. Also, I believe someone here mentioned that the 4 different kinds of reveals in the siding was a detriment to the house. I, on the other hand, think that that is an indication of the changes that were made over time, and I would think that that was a positive and not a negative. That's my thought.
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, then I would say let's let Mr. Dickerson have his say.
Good evening. My name is Jim Dickerson, and some of you know me as your neighbor or teacher of my daughter at Coltrap. I moved back to Geneva in 1991, but lived here in my youth in the 1950s. And moving my family back here was really, for me, like coming home, and it included rejoining St. Mark's Church, where I remember attending years before with my parents. As you all know, St. Mark's is a vital part of Geneva. It was established by Charity Harrington in 1835 and is now the oldest continuous enterprise in Geneva. Our chapel is now a National Historic Landmark. And all of us at St. Mark's, and there are many of us here tonight, are now supporting and contributing funds that are needed for the restoration and improvements of the Larrabee House. We want our donations to be well spent and that this investment will endure for generations. Now, we've heard tonight that the work in this structure has evolved this year, that we have discovered many changes to this house that have taken place over the last 150 years. We are addressing those that need to be restored, repaired, or replaced. And as we've really learned tonight, and these pictures are rather revealing, that the siding has been damaged, changed, or repaired many times over the years. When we removed the aluminum siding, we found several different forms of wood siding. It is likely that the Historic Preservation Commission did not have the opportunity to approve any of those changes. And with all due respect, Mrs. Zinke, that those changes aren't necessarily historic. They do represent changes over time, but they don't necessarily contribute to the beauty and the value of the property. So they're inconsistent, certainly, with the original design and building of the house in 1854. So my question is this: why should we restore all the mistakes that were made in the past as opposed to replacing this current mix of siding with new cedar siding that would be consistent with what Mr. Larrabee installed, or consistent in terms of the approach when he built the building? And secondly, in terms of the classification of its standing, even with either of these choices, this one to repair and the other one to replace, both represent over 50% change to the building, which takes it off the standard that you have been holding it to in the past. So that issue is going to be the same regardless of whether we spend a lot more money. And I think that this, when we get into doing that, we're going to find out a lot of that siding we think that we can keep, we may not be able to keep, whether it's from 1960 or 1970 or whenever the porch came off and was replaced, some of it in the 20s and 30s. Who knows? We do know that we want this building to endure for generations. And by trying to take ancient wood or bad wood, whatever it may be, and trying to keep it may not be in the building's long-term best interest. I understand we want to keep what's old, but repairing it may not be a good solution, especially with all that lead paint. And how many coats? 12 different coats of paint on this wood is not good for it in the long term. So that's my question, and that's my opinion, and I'm hopeful that you will reconsider and allow us to proceed with the replacement of all the siding, because I think it's the best possible option in appearance and everything else, notwithstanding that it will all be the same. I think that's a value to that corner of Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any response to that or questions? No, I'm not. I just asked to see if anybody wants to.
Give me your best shot.
No, we're good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, so what is your pleasure now? What would you like to do with this information that we've got tonight?
It's my understanding from the professional statements that were made that according to the applicants, there are only two viable options. One is to remediate and repair, or one is to remove. So at that point in time, I don't see any value for any additional information. And at this point in time, I think, from my perspective anyway, I'm ready to call it to a vote.
Is there a compromise to be had? I know that there seems to be a little bit of a differences of opinions.
Well, that was what we thought, as Commissioner Zinke brought up last time. I thought that we were going to explore, utilizing the historic materials on one or two elevations, but from what we heard tonight, that was not a viable option. So that brings me back to that there really only are two. And I question in those two options, I think with a sharper pencil or a little more creativity on the coding, that number could be brought down significantly on the remediation and repaint to get something that would be aesthetically acceptable. So I don't personally agree that there's that huge of a gap, or should be that huge of a gap between the two numbers.
George, being an architect, could you, I know this is putting you on the spot, but are there specific places here that you think, on this estimate, are there specific places that it might be worthwhile for the church to try to lower those estimates?
Well, again, I think that the coatings, there are so many different options in the paint. And actually on the repair estimate, I saw that prime was part of one of these, but on the recap, it's added back in to the painting. I think there's a little fat in the painting numbers, or maybe some other options. Possibly even just applying new finish in a higher mill thickness than was originally, rather than, I know there's scraping, how much of the wood needs to replace. I think that there may be a way to reduce that number,
I see. Okay, thank you.
or at least that would be the approach I would take to see if there is a possibility of significantly reducing that number.
So, we are at a point where, do we need a motion? Do we want to move ahead on this thing? Do you feel that, I still have some questions, but, and I'm not sure how these are going to get addressed. I mean, I'm very concerned about the crown molding and the profile being incorrect. I'm a little concerned that we're in violation of standard 6 that says to preserve rather than replace. So I have reservations. I think they've made a fair argument. I mean, I appreciate all the work you've done on this thing. And I know in the past, we have allowed siding to go, but it's been in very extreme cases. I mean, yours is not as, when we look at your house, most people would be thrilled if they took the outside off and saw what's underneath.
Yeah.
I mean, the only case that I can recall was so extreme that it was just, it wouldn't even hold a nail. So, I mean, it has to be.
Can I?
Sure.
Just real quick, just to answer George's question, it wasn't for the lack of trying to find painters to give us estimates. It was for the lack of nobody even coming out. And the bids would probably be higher. You have to understand that the painter that gave us this bid is a gentleman that I've used for 25 years in the industry, and he's doing me a favor, more than likely. So for you guys to sit up here and second guess what's happening in, the construction environment with no labor, no help. People they're just not showing up to jobs. I mean, if we don't get some kind of a resolution here tonight, we're talking about not being able to do any of this until next year, So even just purchasing new siding from Allen Roth, the company that I showed you, they're 6 weeks out. So, I mean, so I just, to think that there's a way to chisel down numbers, I am a chiseler, trust me. I chisel everything, and these numbers, I dare you to find somebody that can do it cheaper or
But
better.
as a
And I'm not
clarifi-
saying that you're calling me out on that, I'm
Right.
just letting you know that these weren't just, arbitrary, and we didn't just make this up.
I understand that completely, and my point was that for 27,000 on the remediation, not that it wasn't a good number, I'd look for another approach that could possibly, I would not take off any of it that wasn't loose,
Well,
okay? Paint, encapsulation is literally encapsulation.
well,
It defeats the whole purpose. You can't call it encapsulation if you're removing it.
Well, unfortunately, I also have a customer that wants a product to have a certain look. And, the look of the product, I respect Mrs. Zinke and her knowledge on the history of things and of the preservation, but sometimes that's not the reality of what people want. I mean, they want it to look like nice, new, fresh siding. To spend all this money and have the thing look like it was, went through the Civil War, doesn't quite cut it,
That's where a filler application or.
But
a
I
greater
tried to get a
milk
filler
thickness.
application, and that's where I spoke with the district manager for Sherwin-Williams. I'd be more than happy to have him speak with you. There's just not a good product
They
out
do it
there.
on concrete block all the time.
Well, even the Rhino Shield, which is, I know it's not an acceptable product, is a very, very thick product. And even they said that it would not, the thickness of the paint, so where it's just peeling off, that you have to take it off because it's loose and chipping. And then I'd have some of the older stuff that was there, the difference in the millimeters and the thickness of that, you couldn't make it up. There just isn't a good product out there to do that. There really isn't. It's not, and it's, so, and that's from the district manager at Sherwin-Williams. So just so that we're all on the same page.
Chairman Hiller, I would just request as staff that whichever way you go with this decision, if you're going to make that tonight, that you're very clear to staff what your expectations are. So for instance, if you're going to allow them to repair, or to replace rather, like they're requesting, I would prefer to know exactly what the commission's expecting as far as replication of moldings and trim and what have you. There's oftentimes the commission takes a vote and leaves to staff to determine, and it's getting to be trickier and trickier to accomplish what I think your goals are without it being specific in the motion. So however if you go into discussion, you propose a motion, whichever way you go, I would implore you to be very, very specific in what your expectations are with that approach.
Okay. Do we feel comfortable with the information that we have? Do we feel that we need, I think they've done a very nice job of presenting their argument, and I know that there's some things that, still bother me about the whole process, but I feel that they've answered most of my questions. I was surprised that I don't remember getting the bids.
They were all in a kind of
Yeah.
mumble jumble the last time.
They got lost in the mumble jumbo.
They were
I'm
not,
sorry about that.
Clearly presented, and unfortunately, I was kind of staying on the side that time, and I was biting my tongue back in the back.
Yeah, we did get those.
All right, and we are preservation. We allow restoration and preservation. When you get into reconstruction, it gets to be a pretty hard bullet to swallow on this. I understand you want it to look like a new building, but it's not a new building. I mean, it's an 1850s building.
I think that their charge is to make it look like it did when Mr. Larrabee had it built,
Well,
which he's, the gentleman over here so eloquently put forward to you guys.
I appreciate that, and I hope that that's what really can do, but I'm thinking that some of the things, and especially some of the trims and all that, must be maintained. Your moldings and all that, your crowns and all that. I can't believe that a new one, to me, I would notice it.
Well, just for clarification, and it would look identical. I mean, when we're done with, if we were allowed to do a complete replacement like we'd like to do, we're gonna find a one-piece crown molding that is very similar in shape to what's up there. Like I said, 45% of that crown molding's coming off anyway, and then I'd have to spend $10,000 to replace that, So if we went the other option, it's still gonna look like it. It's gonna have the same exact look. The ends of the soffit are the fascia boards because the rafters are cut on an angle. Those are going to stay the same. The corner boards are the same. The trim around the windows. It's got a little sill on the bottom of the window, and then a frieze board underneath that. That's going to be the same. The headers over the top. We're going to make all that identical. So realistically, when the building's done, it will look more like it did in 1855 than it does now, and I can guarantee you that.
I would just like to say one thing for the record also, because it's being recorded. This is not going to look like the 1855 building, because we know it's had a life of expansions and altered windows. The bay windows are not 1855, so I think to continue to persist that it's going to look like 1855 is wrong for the historic record of this meeting. I think that it needs to be recognized that it is a building that was built in 1854-55 and has experienced a significant number of changes over time. And I don't think anybody on this commission is asking it to look like 1855, because if they were, the porch wouldn't have been added. They would have asked for 6/6 windows, et cetera. So again, just for clarity, so everybody's on the page, and when somebody looks back at this record, they know this commission understands that whatever approach you take, whether it's repair of the siding or replacement of the siding, you are not returning this building back to 1855. You're returning it back to something between 1925 and 1968.
Which is the best that we can possibly do. And we wanted to make it look like it did then, not with, alligatored paint and.
And the term we hear when you see that is Disneyfication. You can make anything look like it was an original building. You can put it around Disneyland, but it's not. It's not that building. It's not that building anymore.
Well, and that's the point. The building has been moved, it's been altered, we've all proven that many, 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 many times over. So, we feel that we're taking it back to a very good historic point to make it look as, somewhere in that era, like it did when, after the bay, because obviously the bay windows were leaving on, those kind of things, the leaded windows that got added at some point. So yeah, we're not going to take it all the way back, but it's definitely going to be in much better condition with 1970s aluminum siding, aluminum storms, and, that kind of thing. So, that's another thing that we have to look at here, because quite honestly, they didn't even have to do any of that. They could have just said, hey, we'll rehab it, we're going to connect the building and leave the damn aluminum siding on there, leave the aluminum storms. That's another alternative here that we haven't even talked about, that, I may get hung, they may crucify me, maybe me and Jesus Christ on the cross up there next Easter. So hopefully you guys come and pass the plate a little for us. But, that's, I got to answer to a much higher power, so, but thank you for your time.
Okay. So what's your pleasure? Do we feel that have we decided on repair or replace? Do we feel there's room to continue this, or is there necessarily something we could come up with tonight, or anyone have a feeling on this?
I mean, I don't think there's any more information I need.
Right.
Okay.
Me neither.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay.
I think we've heard as much as we need to make a decision.
Okay, is there, a motion that could be made in this, for this? Are we looking at a repair, replace, or someone want to attempt this, or is it something that we would feel we need time to work on?
Mr. Lambert, thinking about a motion. Does the motion say, we can't say as presented, or could we say as presented, because the request from the church is to replace.
Correct. You could make a motion to support replacement per the request, and then a affirmative vote would be for replacement, and a negative vote would be against replacement. And again, if you're going to say as presented, staff would ask that it be clarified what those details are.
Details in the replacement, those details?
If you're making a motion to request, to support replacement per the request, I would ask that staff have a clear understanding in your motion what the details of that replacement include. If you need that spelled out a little bit, for what I'm referring to is exposure to match the existing exposure or the average exposure, whether or not moldings are going to be stock moldings or exact duplicates, all those sorts of things, because those are the questions that come up after you guys make your motion and we get out in the field and everybody starts asking, well, I don't think that's what I understood the commission to be saying. So I would ask that, and I would also ask that whatever motion you make, that you tie it into the standards. We try to do that with most of our motions, so if your motion is going to be something that supports the standards or opposes the standards, I think we need to record that, because our decision should be made not on opinion, but on how we're applying the standards of rehabilitation.
So if the motion is to approve replacement, then that does not support any of the standards. Am I correct in that?
That would be my interpretation of what you just asked, yes.
Okay. So then we would have to say that none of the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation are upheld.
Yes.
I see. Okay. And you were saying that the exposure should match the average reveal, and that, now I'm not clear about the moldings. I'm not clear if they're asking about stock moldings, or the moldings would be custom made, because some of the conversations said it would be
Repair would be custom blades and custom moldings.
Right.
Replace would be new moldings.
would be new moldings, yeah.
That would be.
So then the replacing would then mean, if we go with this as replacing, that the crown molding details will not match the originals. We'd say
Exactly.
something like that.
Well, they won't if that's what you're voting for, yeah.
Well, I think you can summarize it without, if you're accepting stock moldings, then you can say that you're accepting stock moldings as requested. If you're saying that you want all remove trim, that would be corner boards, water tables, window trim, window heads, bed moldings, rake moldings, all that sort of stuff. If you want that to be replicated per the existing profiles, then I think you need to make that clear. So if you're wanting anything replicated, that is not the request that's been presented. You're approving the request with conditions.
Okay. But the request as presented is that the moldings will be stock moldings. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is what was presented, yes.
Yeah, I think that's what we just heard 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, when you say stock moldings, a corner board is a corner board, so a 6-inch corner board is a 6-inch corner board, so those would, and the headers around the windows and the trim around all the windows, yeah, there'll be a stock molding, but it's gonna be duplicated, it's gonna look exactly like what's up there. The only thing that we're talking about is the crown molding. The corbels, we're gonna fix them. Most of them are actually in pretty good shape. I mean, they're small enough piece that we'll take the painstaking time, and that's not even on this, to heat gun them and do whatever we have to do to fix the corbels up. The crown molding is the only thing that I think that, we're talking about. The corner boards and the trim around the windows and the water table or band board, whatever you want to call it, around the bottom, that's all stuff that a 1x12 is a 1x12 in 1854 and in 2019. So
That's not really true, but
yes, it is. It's when it's up, it's going to look the same. It's so
It's different.
we use a 5/4 material, so it's an 1.25 inches thick, and which is what they use on the corners. So really, the crown molding, I think, is maybe what we're talking about.
the bed molding,
Where?
at your eave, at your soffit? Is
Yeah,
there bed molding there? Is that going to be a stock or a match?
Well, I think that, yeah, that's a little piece of crown, like right up in there that you're talking about, right here. Yeah, I mean, that can be matched. I mean, that's not a,
We still use that.
So really that, then this piece and this piece, which this is actually two pieces, because you got the little tiny piece here and the crown molding here.
Just to give you, on the crown molding particularly, just a little background on that. The reason that the crown molding is the one thick piece was, back in the day, it was easier to cut the crown out of a thick piece that would help support the roof. When we do this today, we have to put backing behind that crown molding to help support the plywood on the ends. So that's the reason that crown molding was such a thick, heavy piece, was to help support the roof. And I think we would make the comment also that if it was absolutely a swing vote on what we do here, that if we had to mill the crown molding and go to that additional expense, that I think we would do, I'm sure we would do that. I don't want to spend the church's money, but if that is a stickling point, then I think we would certainly do that.
So you're saying that the moldings, with the exception of the crown molding, would be stock molding?
Correct.
But the crown molding, you would custom
Custom
match.
cut it.
Custom cut. Okay, now another question, Mr. Lambert. I seem to remember sometime or other, we had a discussion about the person who makes the motion and that person's vote. If the person who makes the motion is for the motion to be as presented with the details that we were just discussing, does that person who makes the motion have to vote yes for that?
I don't believe so.
I don't believe so,
You don't
according
believe
to the most recent edition of Robert's Rules.
Okay. Anybody want to do this? No?
Go right.
Want to do this?
It's a long one.
I'll make it.
Okay, this is, oh, okay, yeah,
Oh, I'm
check.
sorry, I had the book,
Check that,
that's why you asked.
Okay, while you're doing that, okay, this is a rough draft. This rough draft, okay. I move that we accept, where is it? We accept the proposed replacement of historic wood siding at 327 South Fourth Street as presented with these exceptions. That the exposure of the siding match the average reveal. That we accept stock moldings with two exceptions. That the corbels be custom matched to the original, and that the crown molding be custom matched to the original.
Back up for a moment, sorry. We accept the stock molding, but with two exceptions, right?
Yes, with two exceptions.
Exceptions, that be the corbels to be.
Custom matched to the original,
Custom match to the original, okay,
or I guess it should be to the originals. And custom molding,
custom,
the crown molding be custom cut to match the original.
wait. The corbels to be custom matched to the originals, and the crown molding, you said?
To be custom
Custom.
cut to match the originals. Okay, what am I missing? That doesn't seem,
I think you covered it.
you think I covered it?
Yeah.
What do you think, George?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Al? Oh, no, and then we have to say something about how this siding replacement does not uphold any of the Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, right? Yep.
How about the siding policy? Is there anything in there that has to be mentioned about the
Oh, the
policy?
siding policy. Let's see.
What was it say again, the last one,
That,
what do not hold the SOI standards, uphold them, the proposed changes that we're talking about?
yeah, the proposed changes
Do not uphold.
for siding replacement do not uphold any of the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation.
Got it.
And Al, the siding policy, is there anything there?
I don't have a copy of it. Oh, jeez.
Mr.
Got a leg
Lambert,
cramp,
is there
sorry.
anything in the siding policy we need to add?
I don't think you need to add, but I think you do need to note that your motion is not following the adopted siding policy for the city of Geneva.
Okay, and please add that, and that this motion does not follow any of the details, is that the right word? No, any of the,
It's not supported by the adopted
it's not
siding
supported
policy
by
of the city of Geneva.
the Geneva Historic Preservation Commission's siding policy. Okay. Would you care to read that back, please?
Sure. Motion by Commissioner Zinke to accept the proposal for 327 South Fourth Street for the replacement of wood siding as presented with the following exceptions. That the exposure of siding match the average reveal. To accept the stock molding with two exceptions. That One being the corbels to be custom cut to match the originals, and two, the crown molding to be custom cut to match the originals. These proposed changes for siding replacement do not uphold any of the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and this motion is not supported by the Geneva HPC's siding policy.
Does that seem okay with everybody?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah? We got it there? Okay.
Just need a second.
Anyone want to second that?
I'll second.
Okay. Okay, I guess we do.
I just don't know if you're reading,
Do we have something from the Roberts rules that have changed?
okay.
Okay.
Wait, are you positive?
No,
Yes? Okay.
you can vote whatever we like.
Okay, so ready for a roll call?
I suppose. Now, if this should not pass, we would offer a second motion, or would we, let's just wait and see what the vote is.
All right. Hamilton,
Based on SOI Standard 6, I have to say no.
that's number 6. Stazen,
Aye.
okay. Zinke,
Based on all the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and our siding policy, I vote no.
okay, and Hiller.
Standard 6. I would like to see some sort of a compromise where we could save some of the original, so I would vote no.
Okay, that fails. 1 yes, 3 noes.
All right, now what? Now,
We should do a second motion, I think.
do we,
No,
we don't need anything. at
you
this
don't need anything. The motion failed with the denial. So the applicant does have the right to appeal to the city council, and the city council then would take up the matter at their schedule.
Yeah, right, okay.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. All right, now we have a secretary's report. Are there any staff updates?
Yes, give me 1 second, please.
Okay.
Oh, my God. I didn't want to do that. I
Thank you, Chairman Hiller. Tonight, I have a couple of items on the Secretary's report. I do need to make a note to the agenda that the discussion I was going to bring forward to you on 208 South River Lane has requested to be withdrawn at this time. They're considering multiple options before they wanted to confer further with staff. I want to bring 201 North 3rd Street to you. This is a request for additional window replacement. Why I'm bringing these cases under the Secretary's report is I believe these are potentially minor issues, but I didn't feel comfortable dealing with them administratively, so I'm looking really just for directions whether I'm proceeding correctly on behalf of the commission. So 201 North 3rd Street, as you recall, is the house at the corner of 3rd and Peyton. Sorry, tonight I was counting my blocks. The house is undergoing a significant renovation. This is what it looked like before renovation began. I know all of you have been by it, you've been found, it's been highlighted in newspaper articles. So the building is under extensive rehabilitation, which includes the replacement of the foundation, the restructuring of the first floor, and then the removal of a north addition and the plant proposal for new additions to the north and east, and the existing detached garage has been relocated on the site as well. What has happened is, as they straightened the house out, the existing windows no longer really function because they were built for the out of square window openings. And there was actually only 6 windows left in the building that were not scheduled for replacement. The windows are not historic windows. They are replacement windows themselves. And so the applicant is requesting to replace those windows. My administrative opinion, based on the work that's being done, was that to allow that, but I thought I needed to afford you the opportunity to comment if I'm headed in the right direction on that. The only 2 questions that were raised is the original window proposed for this project was a Marvin integrity window, which you're familiar with. You've approved those before. There is a consideration that they would like to consider another window manufacturer potentially. One that has been discussed with me is the Weather Shield line, which again replicates the historic sash and rails and historic rails and styles of the sash. So that's one question as to whether or not, as long as I believe they're comparable products, if you allow me to bring this through as an administrative review. And the second thing is, the windows in the existing building are 1/1s. The building is not being restored back to the mid-19th century appearance of 1858 when it was built. It's being restored back to something of the 1920s. And so I believe the 1/1s are appropriate. However, I wanted to bring that also to the commission as to whether you wanted it returned back to 6/6. Again, the completed project will look something much closer to the 1923 configuration based on the Sanborn maps than the 1858. So again, staff believes that the 1/1s are appropriate, but I'm just bringing this to make sure that as staff are representing you correctly.
Michael, I had a question. They have already gotten approval for windows for their addition and other locations on the house when the house is finished. Do you know which windows they have ordered, which company, which manufacturer?
In my conversations last week, the windows are going to be ordered based on our meeting this evening.
Oh, I see.
So they've not placed any window order yet. They're considering changing all of them to the same brand.
I see.
Again, the bay window and the front windows were scheduled already to be replacement windows.
Okay.
I'm just looking for confirmation that I'm representing the commission's desires.
I'm fine.
I'm good with that. Is anybody?
Me too.
Okay. Thank you.
The only thing I would say is if the owner really loved the 6/6, maybe they should just make the choice.
Okay, I can leave that option to them if that's comfortable with everybody. Like I said, it's,
Anybody else feel that way, or is it just me?
so it's an either or because
I'm indifferent.
You're indifferent, okay.
there's no documentation as to when the windows were replaced with 1/1s.
Right.
So if everybody's comfortable, I can pass that message on to the owners that it's their choice.
Was there any documentation that said it was ever 6/6?
Well, for the period of this house, 1858, you wouldn't have had the technology to produce 1/1 windows to have that large of a piece of glass. That came out in the 1880s, 1890s.
So it probably did.
Correct.
It would look better.
Yeah. I'm fine with giving them the choice.
The choice.
Yeah.
I think he would probably choose that if he had that.
Okay, I will notify them. It will not be tomorrow because I am not here tomorrow, but I will notify them first thing on Thursday morning.
Was there something about the relocation of the garage was going to be different on that?
No, what I believe you on the last rendition was the location where it was going to be, if I go back to those notes. It was originally proposed to be closer to the street, but before it came to you for final approval, zoning review had worked with the applicant to push it back to meet zoning.
So where it is right this minute is in the proper location?
It's a temporary location at this point. The garage won't be set until this is back down on the ground and they have room to work on the site again,
So then the garage has to go farther
to the north,
Back.
farther back from the
farther
street.
back, so that's farther back, okay.
It can't go closer to the lot line than the closest element of the house. Isn't that right?
Correct.
It has to.
Essentially, that's correct, yes.
And can you guess how many feet back it will have to go? I'm just curious.
The architect has left us, he could tell you exactly, I don't remember.
Sean, where are you when we need
Katie
you?
left.
I don't recall,
Okay,
I would say quite a bit, though.
yeah. It's only about 8 feet off the addition, is the rear of the garage is about 8 feet off the addition,
I see.
okay?
It's right up to the fence right now.
Yes, I know, I was there this afternoon, so I was thinking that made their backyard a little nicer, but I guess not. Okay.
Okay. The next case I'm bringing forward to you because this is a good project on many fronts for the commission to consider. This is 318 North 2nd Street. It came to us as a project that was not intended to be a tax assessment freeze project, so we did not look at it according to the standards for the tax assessment freeze. Subsequently, the owners have decided to pursue the tax assessment freeze, and they've made numerous changes to the plan that I'm really just bringing this forward to you for your edification. It might help you in determining future cases to follow what the Secretary or what the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office's review has resulted in the modifications. So the state was concerned with 3 or 4 things in the review. One is the retention of the original porch fenestration. Secondly, was the exposure of this first window, at least, in the future addition, and then keeping the addition subservient to the primary historic house form. So this is what was proposed. If you recall, there was a matching porch to the addition on the north side, the green on the upper portion of the drawing. The yellow is the addition, the red is the original building, the light blue is the historic porch. This is what was proposed, and you remember we had lots of discussion on the details of the windows under the historic porch and the windows under the new porch, and whether a metal roof was appropriate on the new porch, and whether that was an appropriate depth for the porch, all those sorts of things. There was also the discussion about the chimney, whether it was too massive. So these are all the drawings that were proposed. These are the revised drawings. You'll notice that the yellow addition on the north now is set back from the street past the historic first window on the north side of the building. The porch has been eliminated from that side, and the addition has been pushed a little bit further back on the lot with the new house plan. So it results in, oops, there we go. So the doorway is being restored without a side light. This was the discussion that we had talking about, this was staff's recommendations for complying with the standards, was to work windows in something like this. The precedent, or not the precedent, but a neighborhood example is the house at 422 Stevens Street, which is a very similar massing and house with similar fenestration. So the revised that were approved by the State Preservation Agency, or State Preservation Office, was to restore the historic windows at the original porch and redesign the kitchen to accommodate the historic window patterns instead of designing the kitchen and making the windows match the kitchen. And then the porch was removed from the right side and again, set back, and then the chimney was eliminated, so they went to a different type of fireplace, a direct vent fireplace. So again, the details of the elevation didn't change significantly, but you can see it's pushed significantly further back to expose that one historic window. And the south elevation changed a little bit in the rear, but again, you can see that the door under the porch is the historic door and eliminates the introduction of a side light that was proposed. So again, this is going through the tax assessment freeze process, so that kind of is the prime importance to the homeowners. So again, this is really not for a decision for me. I just thought this would be a good illustration of how the state applies the standards and how we should be looking at them as well when we're looking at projects locally. Are there any questions about?
Well, on the change of the windows on that elevation there, I thought, we talked about that then, but I thought the whole discussion was based on the kitchen layout, what were they gonna do with the counters?
So this is a good point, and again, we review the exteriors, and oftentimes designers will work from the interior out.
Right.
So one of the things that we should be looking at as a commission is what was historically part of the building,
Right.
and is there a way to accommodate what was historically at the building and accommodate the interior, and that's what occurred here. So again, I think sometimes the commission, rightfully so, tries to work with homeowners to accomplish what they're looking for. But again, we do have the Secretary of Interior standards that we should be applying and trying to see if there's a compromise there. And that's what happened with the state negotiations.
So then the information they gave us was not exactly factual then, because it was, as I recall, this is the only way we
Yes.
can do it.
Yes, that's what we heard.
And sometimes that's probably where the commission should say, we think there's probably a way around it. We
Could
need
you
to
go
come back
back
and
to
look
the
at that.
plan of the
Sure.
kitchen there? And I don't want to take up your evening here.
That's right. So
but,
this is the new plan.
I see.
Okay.
And
So
the
what are they
old
putting
plan.
over there then?
The old plan was to have counters.
Yeah, there's the
typically
sink.
U-shape.
Yeah.
So I will say that this is one of the things that staff did when they got into the quandary of trying to figure out how to get the tax assessment freeze. I did meet with the homeowner and the architect, and we met on site, and I suggested they pursue something like this that would preserve the windows.
So there won't be a counter under those windows then? That's just an aisle there then, huh?
Correct.
Okay.
With a counter across.
Cross and an island in the middle. Well, that works, but, you know,
It doesn't look like there's enough storage there to
Well,
me.
They didn't lose anything really in this plan.
Did not,
Yeah.
okay. all
That's
right then.
interesting.
but,
That was an L-shaped
Yeah.
counter.
They have, I think they may have lost a couple feet, I take that back. I think they lost a couple feet, but in the reality with the way the kitchen laid out and where they moved appliances and
better.
stuff, they have the same workspace basically they were trying to achieve.
Oh, that's good.
So-
Is there a pantry here?
There is a pantry, right there's a small
Okay.
pantry.
All right, but at least that'll be someplace for.
Okay.
They eliminated a small bar right here that was gonna be a kind of a pass-through, and they opened that up actually into a doorway now again,
okay.
so.
Are the homeowners happy?
I believe not only are they happy, but they're also very happy that it appears that it's going to satisfy the tax assessment freeze. Their taxes were scheduled to, I think, about triple by the time they got the addition done, so that's why the tax assessment freeze became important to them.
Oh, well, that would be a big factor in making concessions in your kitchen layout then, where we didn't present those alternative for motivation. Okay.
So it's just, again, a good lesson that sometimes if we're struggling with an exterior element, maybe the problem isn't the commission's interpretation of what the exterior should be, but maybe it's a push to have the design team look at alternatives that would support the historic exterior.
Did I also see on the new plan that the metal roof was now switching over to the historic? porch?
There is a metal roof on the historic porch and on the bay window.
Because it's not metal today.
Correct. And I'm not sure, the last correspondence, I think that is still a detail that the state is working through. They wanted some evidence that there were metal roofs on porches, so I know there was some work being done on looking at Sanborn maps to show that it was something that did occur in Geneva. And again, the detail is, for this is being approved, is that it's a very historic seam. It's a rolled seam and not a applied batten like you see on some of the more modern metal roofs.
But they were painted galvanized and were not the colors that, I seriously doubt if they're going to try to match the colors of period metal roofs. Even
Yeah,
if,
I don't know what the color is. Again, the state looks at colors being reversible, even though it's a semi-permanent
okay.
material. But I do think they're going with black, if I remember correctly
yeah,
here.
that wouldn't have been.
Well, black, silver, and red were very typical. Green was also used sometimes for metal roofing, but black was a metal roofing paint color,
But not sky blue.
but not sky blue.
Okay.
Other questions on this project? If not, the only thing I wanted to really present this evening was just give you an update that some of you are familiar with Donovan Ripkema, who is an economist who is known in preservation circles. He is the CEO of a company called Place Economics, and he has been in Chicago the last 2 days, and David DeGroot, the Director of Community Development, Kathleen Timoshenko, who's the Director of Economic Development for the city, and myself were able to sit in on a discussion that they had. We were sit on by phone today, and after he gave the lecture yesterday, he met with several groups of people, and so we were with a group of some suburban communities and some other leaders in the Landmarks Illinois organization, talking about some of the challenges of preservation and economic development. I don't have a whole summary, I haven't had a chance to put my notes together, but in speaking with Kathleen Timoshenko and David, there were a lot of good ideas that came out that we are starting to think about, can they be integrated into some of the Geneva planning and programming that we're trying to do for preservation and economic development. So not sure where those will go, but I just want to report that, we are trying to reach out and communicate with other communities to constantly improve our preservation and economic development scenarios here.
Oh, now he comes back. Well,
You may, we probably passed.
No, the next thing on the agenda is anything from the commission?
public.
Anything from the public?
and here comes Mr. Public.
So, George, I got to defend myself a little bit, right? Right? I mean, and I just caught a little piece of it, so I'm a little bit out of breath. So I want to rush over. I have to give my client the best product they can. And so the kitchen I designed at that time was to their liking, right? So I had to work with them in terms of that. I'm serving many masters when I do this. And you're an architect, you know.
Well, that was to my point,
Right.
really, was when an applicant presents that this is the best and only
Right.
viable, as a commissioner, then that limits my decision. How can I say, well, but go back and try something
Yeah.
else? Because
And-
was it that important? But, with the motivation from the state.
Right.
With the tax, then
Right.
that is a real strong motivator, which we don't have.
You don't have that stick, right? And actually, I mean, to your point too, the value that someone like yourself brings with a history of being an architect also lends itself to providing some professional insight on that. I know on occasions when I was on the commission, there'd be times where I'd come in and have some schemes maybe sort of worked out, though you're not supposed to be designing on behalf of the clients or on behalf of the public. But I just thought I'd pop in to say that because,
And I understand completely.
Yeah.
I just didn't know as a commissioner,
Right.
issue when we hear this is the really only viable
Yeah.
alternative to that. No, you're right, I could have sat down and, well,
Doodles.
look at this.
Right.
But
Right.
that's
Yeah.
not my conclusion.
And as you look at the two schemes, the two kitchens, in terms of countertop, cabinetry, all that stuff, they had to make some compromises in order to do that. And, you know, one big compromise too was pushing that addition as far back as we had to, and then the loss of the porch. So there are a lot of, a lot of feedback, a lot of sticks that, you know, the state can use, especially with that kind of financial benefit of the tax freeze. So, and I've been in your shoes too, sitting there and listening to people say, no, it's the only way we can do it.
I'm doing it.
I know. Yeah, that's right, right.
And also, and this, and Sean knows this as well as the commission knows this, that's why I try to ask all the time, are you pursuing a tax assessment freeze project? Because there are things that, when they say they're pursuing a tax assessment freeze project, that I will push a little bit harder with the applicant or the designer or the commission, because I know it's not going to pass at that level. Where they're not, when someone's trying, is intending not to use that program, then I tend to let the commission and the designers and the applicant have a little more flexibility to try to work out a compromise. So, like I said, this was a change, that's why I brought it back to you, so you understood what the process was. As Sean has pointed out, it's always a give and take when you try to take advantage of that tax assessment freeze program. And we're going through that same thing right now with 112 North Fifth. They did not intend to do a tax assessment freeze program application, but they are pursuing that now, and they're going through the same exact process of some give and take of what they can live with and what they can't live with to see if they can make the program work for them.
Well, and interestingly enough,
I'm not sure I remember.
Was that the young couple?
Yes, where they were, the north facade
Oh, yeah.
elevation, yeah.
Oh,
But what?
I helped them on the map. That was with that 45 linear feet on that one elevation.
Do a
with
tax
one
assessment
punched
freeze.
hole.
Right.
yeah, yeah,
It was, you know, and they were only looking at it from the inside,
right.
not from the outside.
Yeah. And I will say, one of the, I mean, super helpful, oftentimes is Michael's insights on this. I mean, even with the initial ideas with the Parker project, we thought actually that it wasn't going to be an issue having to push it back beyond that first window. We kind of posed a design where we could still keep the porch, but it would be okay with that window, and the state came back. So, I mean, you know, sometimes you just don't know exactly what the requirement's going to be. I mean, they could have very well said, well, there are 2 historic windows on there, push it all the way back. Well, at that point, we can't do the project, right? So it's always kind of a game there, trying to figure out where you're gonna go with it. So anyway, I appreciate you all. Keep working at it. Long night for you all, and longer night for me now, so.
Thanks for coming back and clearing that up.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, Mrs. Zinke, you had asked about the garage on
Yes.
the GM Poli.
Yes.
So the garage, to Commissioner Hamilton's point, it has to align with the bay.
With the base.
So when the bay gets built, the front of that has to align with it based on the zoning. So that's
And there's no way to ask for a zoning?
a variance.
Variance?
That's more time, and it's floating in the air right now, so,
Oh, as the house is.
yeah, so time is
Soon
of the
before
essence.
they lower that down on the foundation.
Yeah, so actually, they still have the pad there, and so they have to, we made some adjustments, so we have a single column there. We used to have 2 columns in that old pad area, now we have a single column there to carry steel that they'll eventually be able to drop down. So they're gonna build the entire floor and then drop it right onto it,
Oh,
So-
my.
yeah. So,
Is that going to happen before winter comes?
yes.
Yes? Okay. All right.
Can you guarantee us a long fall?
That's a
No-
deep,
no
that's a
snow
deep
till February 1st, huh?
basement too, isn't it? That's a pretty high ceiling they have down there.
Yeah, it's a 9-foot pour.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
It's not,
Thank you for coming.
9 foot.
Thanks, Sean.
Oh, I guess it's still back to me. Is there any more business? Anyone have any new business, or anybody else want to get out of here as much as I do?
Oh, yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
One fast question. The Third and Ford. the northeast corner. So they just started demolition,
Third and what?
Third and
Third and
Ford.
Ford.
Well, they just took off the back end of the house. Yes.
I didn't recall, I didn't recall that much was being taken off.
On that one, the entire rear kitchen and the former garage were all being scheduled for removal.
Okay, that's
but-
what they did.
But didn't we see that project twice with two different owners? So you may have been thinking about the previous owner.
Both examples removed the same amount,
Oh,
and
did
that's,
they?
I
yes.
just, okay.
And again, that's not a tax assessment freeze project.
It is not, okay. Well, now that they have taken out all the bushes, now you can really see what's going on. 'Cause there was that whole row of
I'm glad they
bushes.
started that one.
So,
Yeah.
I've not been by there yet to see it, so.
It's a little scary.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Favor?
Oy,
Ah.
oy.
All in favor, say aye.